My name is Caleb Vance, and I'm 75 years old. At my wife Lena's funeral, I watched our son Jamal and his wife Tiffany shed tears that never reached their eyes. The very next day, they were in our living room taking pictures of the furniture and whispering about appraisals. They thought grief had made me deaf and blind. They thought I was just a sad old man, a relic to be managed. They had no idea I was holding on to my wife's final gift to me, a secret, a strategy, and a promise. So when my son finally told me to start packing because the house was sold, I smiled. I let him think he'd already won the war. Before I tell you exactly what happened next and how my brilliant Lena's final plan unfolded from beyond the grave, do me a favor and let me know in the comments where you're listening to my story from. And please hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that wisdom, not greed, should always have the final say. The silence in the house after a funeral is a different kind of quiet. It's heavy. It's thick. It fills up all the spaces where laughter used to be. I sat in my old armchair, the worn leather cool against my skin, and stared at the empty one across from me. Lena's chair. The indentation from where she sat every evening for the last 50 years was still there, a ghost of her presence. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the side table, her pen resting beside it, as if she'd just gotten up to refill her tea. The whole house felt like that, a paused moment in time that I was trapped in. Grief isn't a loud, crashing wave. It's a slow, cold tide, and it was pulling me under. I took a deep breath, but the air itself felt empty, stripped of the faint scent of lavender that always followed her through a room. I was 75 years old, a husband without his wife, and I had never felt more alone in my life. The grandfather clock in the hall, a gift from Lena's parents on our wedding day, seemed to tick louder now, each swing of the pendulum a merciless count of the seconds I was living without her. It used to be a comforting sound, the steady heartbeat of our home. Now it was a countdown. To what I wasn't sure. I ran a hand over my face, the skin feeling thin and papery like an old map. I felt every one of my 75 years. I felt the weight of 50 years of love, and now the crushing weight of its absence. I was vulnerable adrift on an ocean of sorrow, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the sharks were already circling. I wasn't just alone with my grief. I was alone with them. From the kitchen, I heard my daughter-in-law Tiffany's voice, sharp and clear like chipping ice. "Did you get a picture of that grandfather clock, Jamal? Those things go for a fortune online." "I got it. I got it." My son's voice was a low murmur, irritated but complicit. "Just keep it down. Dad's right in the next room." "That's the point," she hissed back, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried even better than her normal tone. "He's too lost in his grief to notice anything. This is the perfect time to get a full inventory." Inventory. The word struck me like a physical blow, as if Lena hadn't just been lowered into the cold Georgia clay, but had simply moved out. I heard the faint click of her smartphone camera, once, twice, a third time. She wasn't taking pictures of the family photos on the mantelpiece, the ones of Jamal as a little boy on my shoulders. She was documenting assets. The cherry wood cabinet I built with my own 2 hands. The porcelain bird collection Lena cherished. The antique lamp we'd saved up for 3 months to buy for our 10th anniversary. Each click was another small chip at my heart. Jamal walked into the living room, his face arranged into a mask of perfect somber concern. He was a real estate agent. He knew how to sell an illusion. "Dad, you need anything? Can I get you some water?" I just shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. I was afraid a roar of pure rage would come out instead of words. "It's going to be okay, Dad," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. The touch was weightless, meaningless. "We're going to take care of you. Take care of me, or take care of what I owned." I looked up into his eyes, searching for the boy. I raised the one who used to spend hours in my workshop just watching me work, his eyes wide with wonder. All I saw now was a shallow reflection of his own ambition, a poorly hidden impatience. Tiffany glided in after him, her phone now tucked away, but the predatory gleam in her eyes was impossible to hide. She walked over to the fireplace and ran a manicured finger over the carved oak mantelpiece I had installed 30 years ago. "Lena had such wonderful taste," she said, her voice dripping with fake sentimentality. "She means expensive taste," I thought. "Everything in this house is just timeless." "She means sellable." She moved through the room like an appraiser, her movements disguised as aimless wandering. She stopped by the bay window, looking out at the garden Lena had poured her heart into. All this space, she sighed dramatically. It must feel so empty now. Jamal took his cue. That's what we're worried about, Dad. This is a big house for one person. The upkeep, the taxes. We're just thinking about what's practical. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You know how this neighborhood is changing. The property values are skyrocketing. The last house on this block, the Miller Place, it sold for almost $1 million. $1 million, Dad. He said it like a magic number, a number that should erase grief, a number that should make sense of everything. He didn't mention that the Millers were our friends for 40 years and were forced to sell to developers who were tearing down history to put up boxy, soulless condos. He only saw the number. Tiffany drifted over to the dining room entrance, her eyes fixed on the crystal chandelier we bought on a trip to Savannah. Oh, I remember when Lena picked this out, she said, her voice filled with manufactured nostalgia. She said it reminded her of Starlight. Then she turned to Jamal, thinking she was out of my direct line of sight. I bet that's worth at least $5,000 on its own, she whispered, the sound cutting through the quiet room like a razor. Jamal gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent warning. But it was too late. I had heard it. They were vultures picking apart the bones of my life before I was even gone. They weren't seeing a home filled with the memories of a 50-year love story. They were seeing a collection of assets, a checklist of items to be liquidated. My grief was not a tragedy to them. It was an opportunity, a window of vulnerability they could exploit. I closed my eyes, feigning a wave of weariness. I let my head sink back into the cushions of my armchair. I had to maintain the illusion of a broken old man. It was the only armor Lena had left me. I listened as their footsteps receded, followed by another flurry of whispers near the front door, their voices urgent and greedy as they planned their next move. They were so confident, so sure of my weakness. They had no idea that in my silence I was stronger than I had ever been. After they finally left, cloaking their departure in a flurry of empty promises to call and check in, the silence rushed back in heavier than before. I finally allowed myself to stand, my joints protesting with a groan. I walked down the hall to our bedroom, the room that now felt cavernously large and cold. The scent of Lena's lavender potpourri still lingered in the air, a sweet ghost of her presence. I went to her nightstand, my fingers tracing the familiar grain of the dark oak wood we had picked out together so many years ago. I opened the top drawer. Beneath a stack of her favorite poetry books was a simple sealed manila envelope. Her handwriting was on the front, a little shaky from her last few weeks, but still as elegant as ever. It said, "For Caleb, when you need it." I didn't need to open it, not yet. I knew what it represented. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, and the memory flooded in as vivid as if it were yesterday. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon about 2 months before she passed. The illness had taken its toll, leaving her frail beneath the crisp white sheets, but it had not touched her mind. Her eyes, when they met mine, were as sharp and clear as polished steel. The soft light from the window illuminated the lines on her face, lines I had loved for half a century. She had patted the space on the bed next to her. Caleb, she'd said, her voice a soft whisper, but every word was deliberate, filled with purpose. Come sit with me. We need to talk, really talk. I sat down, taking her small, cool hand in mine. We're always talking, my love. No, she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. Not like this. I need you to listen, really listen, about Jamal. My heart sank. I knew where this was going. I had seen the small signs she was talking about, but I had chosen to ignore them, to bury them under a father's stubborn hope. Lena, honey, he's a good boy. He's just under a lot of pressure. That business of his, the real estate market, is tough. A sad smile touched her lips, a smile of profound wisdom and gentle disappointment. He was a good boy. Now he's a man who has lost his way, and his wife is holding the map. Don't you see it, Caleb? The way they look at things in this house, the way Tiffany's eyes linger on my mother's pearls, not with admiration but with calculation. The way Jamal talks about this house not as the place he grew up, but as an investment, as prime real estate in a hot neighborhood. She was right. I had seen it. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. It was too painful a truth to accept, a truth that felt like a personal failure. He loves us, Lena. I argued weakly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He loves the idea of us, she corrected gently. He loves the security we represent. But Tiffany has taught him to love money more. She's convinced him that our life's work is nothing more than his future inheritance. And they are not patient people, my love. They won't wait. The moment I'm gone, they will start circling. They'll see you not as a grieving father, but as an obstacle between them and the life they feel they deserve. She coughed a dry, rattling sound that tore at my soul. I helped her take a sip of water from the glass by her bed. Her eyes never left mine, holding me with an intensity that belied her physical weakness. That's why I've made arrangements. She continued, her voice stronger, now filled with a fierce resolve. I have not been idle these past few months, Caleb. My lawyer, Ms. Jones, the sharp one, not Henderson, she has everything. There's a plan, Caleb. A plan to protect you, and a plan to give Jamal the one thing he truly needs, the one thing we failed to give him, a lesson. A hard lesson about the difference between value and price. She reached over and tapped the nightstand. There is an envelope in that drawer. It has a key inside. Everything you need to know will begin with that key, but none of it will work unless you make me a promise. Anything. I whispered, my throat tight with unshed tears, the finality of her words settling upon me. Her eyes bored into mine, filled with a fierce, protective love that transcended the pain and the illness. When I'm gone, they will cry. They will put on a show of sorrow. Do not believe their tears, Caleb. They will circle you like vultures, pretending to care for the dying animal while waiting for the feast. Let them. Let them think you are weak. Let them think you are lost without me. Promise me, no matter what happens, no matter what they say or do, you will follow the plan. You will be silent and you will observe. Will you do that for me, Caleb? Will you promise me? I looked at the love of my life, the woman who had built this world with me, now using her last ounces of strength not to fight her own battle, but to protect me from ours. In that moment, my denial shattered, replaced by a painful clarity. I saw everything she was talking about. I saw the path ahead. I leaned forward and kissed her forehead. I promise, Lena, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I promise. Bringing myself back to the present. The memory faded, leaving me alone in the quiet, empty room. The grief was still there, a raw, open wound, but now woven into it was a thread of cold, hard purpose. I was no longer just a victim of my sorrow. I was a man with a mission. I was the executor of my wife's final, brilliant act of love, and I would not fail her. I stood up from the bed and walked back toward the living room. From the doorway, I could see them, their heads bent together over Tiffany's phone, scrolling through what I could only imagine were listings for antique furniture. Jamal was pointing at the screen, and Tiffany was nodding enthusiastically. They were so engrossed in their planning, so confident in my irrelevance, that they didn't even notice me standing there. And in that moment, I looked at my son, the boy I taught how to ride a bike and bait a fishing hook, and I saw a stranger. The love was still there, buried deep beneath layers of disappointment, but the illusion was gone. Lena's words had stripped away the filter of a father's hope. I no longer saw a misguided son. I saw an adversary. I no longer saw an ambitious daughter-in-law. I saw a predator. They were exactly what Lena had said. They were vultures waiting for the feast. A strange calmness settled over me. The raging sea of my grief had not vanished, but it had frozen over, becoming a solid, clear sheet of ice. Beneath the surface, the pain was still immense, churning and cold, but on top, I could finally think. I could finally plan. My promise to Lena was not a burden. It was my armor and my sword. I knew with absolute clarity what I had to do. My performance had to be flawless. I had to become the man they already saw me as, a relic from a bygone era, befuddled by grief, too tired to fight. I had to let them underestimate me. In fact, I had to encourage it. Their arrogance would be their downfall. My perceived weakness would be my greatest strength. I was a carpenter by trade. I spent my life taking raw materials and shaping them into something strong and lasting. I knew how to be patient, how to be precise, how to follow a blueprint. And Lena, my brilliant Lena, had left me the most important blueprint of my life. This deception would be my final project, my masterpiece built in her honor. I took a deep breath and deliberately shuffled into the room, leaning heavily on a nearby table as if unsteady on my feet. I let a look of confusion cloud my face. What were you two talking about? I asked, my voice intentionally frail and a little raspy. They both jumped, startled, quickly shutting off the phone. They exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. The hook was set. Just admiring the house, Dad, Jamal said, his voice oozing a fake sympathy that was now painfully obvious to me. just talking about all the wonderful memories. I looked at them, my heart a block of ice, but my face a mask of sorrow, and I gave a slow, sad nod. So many memories, I whispered. The performance of a lifetime had just begun, and I would not miss a single line. This was for Lena. 4 days later, they came back. I was in the kitchen trying to remember how Lena made her coffee, a little bit of cinnamon. She always said it warms the soul. When I heard their key in the front door, they didn't knock. They were already treating the house like it was theirs. They walked in carrying a grocery bag filled with things I didn't eat: kale, almond milk, some kind of organic cereal that looked like birdseed. It was a prop, another piece of their stage production titled, "We Are Such Caring Children." Dad Jamal called out, his voice echoing in the too quiet house. "We brought you a few things." I walked into the living room, leaning on my cane a little more than I needed to. Tiffany rushed over, her face a perfect picture of concern. "Oh, Caleb, you look tired. Have you been eating properly? We were so worried we couldn't sleep last night just thinking of you here all alone." She says all alone, but she means unsupervised, I thought. I offered a weak smile. "I'm managing. Thank you for the birdseed." She laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Oh, you. It's good for you. We just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." She placed the bag on the kitchen counter and then pivoted her tone, shifting from personal to practical with breathtaking speed. "You know, Caleb, lying awake last night, I had a thought. A really important one." I sat down in my armchair, bracing myself. The performance was beginning. "Oh, yes," she said, pulling a chair closer, leaning in as if she were about to share a profound secret. "This house, this beautiful house, is your life's work. It's your biggest asset, your nest egg. We have to make sure it's protected." I stayed silent, letting her spin her web. With everything that's happened, paperwork can get lost. Policies can become outdated. What if there was a fire or a tornado? God forbid. Is your homeowner's insurance up to date with the current market value of the property? This neighborhood has changed so much since you first bought the policy. She shook her head, a perfect imitation of dawning horror. "You could be underinsured by hundreds of thousands of dollars. If anything happened, you wouldn't get what it's worth." It was a masterfully crafted speech, each word chosen to sound like prudent, loving advice. She didn't talk about selling, she talked about protecting. She didn't talk about value for them. She talked about value for me. Jamal, who had been watching with an admiring look on his face, jumped in right on cue. "Honey, that's a brilliant idea. I hadn't even thought of that." He turned to me, his voice earnest. "She's right, Dad. It's just a formality. We should get a professional appraisal, not for any reason other than to update the insurance policy. A simple precautionary measure so we all have peace of mind." He says peace of mind, but he means a piece of the pie, my inner voice said. "An appraisal," I said, making my voice sound tired and confused. I don't know. The insurance is the same it's always been. It was fine for your mother." "Exactly," Tiffany pounced. "It was fine for then. But things are different now. The market is different. It's just about being a responsible homeowner, Caleb. It's what Lena would have wanted. She was always so practical, using Lena against me. A low blow, but an effective one." I looked from my son's eager face to my daughter-in-law's predatory smile. They were a team, a well-oiled machine of greed disguised as concern. Jamal pushed the advantage. "Look, Dad, I don't want to stress you out. We can make it easy. My colleague at the office, Tom, he does appraisals all the time. He's the best. He could just pop over for an hour, take a quick look around. No fuss. It's just for the paperwork. He'd do it as a favor to me." A favor. Yes, I was sure he would. A favor that would give them a certified number, a weapon to use in the next phase of their attack. I had to let them have it. I had to let them feel that they were winning, that their flimsy manipulations were working on the grieving old man. I let out a long theatrical sigh. I rubbed my temples as if a headache was coming on. "I don't know, son. Strangers walking through the house. It feels too soon. He's not a stranger, Dad. He's my friend," Jamal said, his voice taking on a slightly impatient edge, "and he'll be completely respectful. We'll be here with you the whole time. Please, Dad, do it for us, for our peace of mind." I stayed silent for a long moment, letting them hang in the balance. I looked around the room at the pictures on the wall, at the chair where my wife used to sit. Then I looked back at them and gave a slow, defeated nod. All right, I said, my voice barely a whisper. If you really think it's for the best. The relief that washed over their faces was instantaneous and profound. Tiffany's smile became genuine for the first time, a triumphant, greedy flash of white teeth. Jamal patted my arm. Thanks, Dad. You won't regret it. We're just looking out for you. They left soon after, showering me with praise for being so sensible and promising to set everything up. As the door closed behind them, I listened to their footsteps fade away. The silence of the house returned, but it wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the quiet of a hunter in a blind watching the prey walk confidently into the clearing. They thought they had just taken the first piece in a game of checkers. They had no idea I was playing chess, and my queen had already made her move 50 years ago. The following Tuesday they arrived. I was in my workshop in the back of the garage, the one place that still felt entirely mine. The scent of cedar and sawdust was a comfort, a tangible link to a life of purpose of creating things with my own two hands. The quiet hum of the air filter was the only sound. Then I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, followed by the familiar sound of Jamal's car door shutting. But there was a third door, a heavier one. Company. I wiped my hands on an old rag and walked out to meet them. There, standing on my lawn next to Jamal and Tiffany, was a man in a crisp polo shirt and slacks holding a clipboard like a shield. He had a slick, practiced smile and the kind of eyes that didn't just look at you. They assessed you. This had to be Tom. Dad. Jamal called out, his voice a little too bright, a little too cheerful. Perfect timing. This is my friend I was telling you about, Tom Connell. Tom stepped forward and offered me a firm, dry handshake. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Vance. Jamal's told me so much about you. I'm very sorry for your loss. His words were smooth, but his eyes were already scanning the house, taking in the roofline, the condition of the porch, the width of the property. Insurance, you said, I asked, letting my voice sound frail and a bit shaky. I squinted at Tom as if I was having trouble focusing. It all seemed so complicated. The house is fine, isn't it? Tiffany immediately swooped in, linking her arm through mine in a gesture that was meant to look supportive but felt proprietary, like she was leading a prized horse. Of course it is, Caleb. It's a wonderful house. This is just to make sure the paperwork is all up to date. Tom's just going to take a quick look around so the insurance company knows what a gem they're protecting. She smiled down at me, a dazzling, predatory smile. We'll be right here with you. You don't have to worry about a thing. You just rest right here in your chair. I allowed her to guide me back inside, playing the part of the feeble patriarch. I settled into my armchair, the one that faced the fireplace, and let out a long, weary sigh, as if the effort of the short walk had exhausted me. Well, all right then, if you say so. Just try not to make a mess. That was their cue. The performance began in earnest. Jamal and Tiffany led the tour with Tom following his pen, scratching away at his clipboard. They moved through the rooms I had shared with Lena for 50 years, their voices a low, constant murmur. As you can see, Tom, original hardwood floors throughout. Jamal would say, his voice taking on the professional, confident tone he used with clients. Solid oak. They don't make them like this anymore. And Mom just had the kitchen countertops redone with granite last year, Tiffany would add, running her hand over the cool, smooth stone. For my benefit, she'd say, she had such an eye for detail, didn't she? Caleb, I'd just nod from my chair watching them. They aren't measuring walls, I thought, as Tom aimed a small laser device at the ceiling. They're measuring my life for a coffin made of cash. I watched them move a pack of wolves, gracefully surveying a sheep's pen, confident the old shepherd was fast asleep. Every word of praise for my home was a veiled assessment of its market value. Every sentimental remark was a lie designed to keep me docile. They moved into the dining room. Notice the custom wainscoting, Jamal pointed out. My dad did that himself. Beautiful craftsmanship, Tom replied, his voice a professional purr. He looked at me and said, You have a real gift, Mr. Vance. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like he was appraising me along with the woodwork, judging how much fight I had left in me. I just gave a weak, dismissive wave of my hand. I was a silent observer in my own home. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play. I saw my son pointing out the features of his childhood home with the dispassionate eye of a salesman. I saw my daughter-in-law, her eyes gleaming every time Tom made a note on his clipboard, her mind clearly filled with the sound of a cash register. They asked me a few questions, throwing them over their shoulders as they moved from room to room. Dad, when was the roof last replaced? Jamal asked from the hallway. The roof, I mumbled, looking up at the ceiling as if the answer were written there. Oh, Lena handled all of that. A few years ago, I think. I can't recall. Every vague answer, every confused shrug seemed to fuel their confidence. I could see it in the way they exchanged small, triumphant glances. The old man doesn't know a thing. He's a ghost already. The hardest part was the bedroom. Our bedroom. I stayed in my chair, but I could hear their voices drifting down the hall. Tiffany's voice was the loudest, her excitement making her careless. And this is the master. Look at the size of it, Tom. Definitely has potential for an ensuite bathroom expansion. That's a huge selling point. I felt a hot flash of rage. She was standing in the most sacred space of my marriage, a room that still held the scent of my wife, and she was talking about selling points and bathroom expansions. I gripped the arms of my chair, my knuckles turning white. For a moment, the mask almost slipped. I wanted to roar, to throw them out, to tell them what they really were. But then I felt Lena's presence, her calming voice in my mind. Be silent, Caleb. Be patient. Let them show you who they are. I took a slow, steadying breath and forced my hands to relax. I let the anger recede, replaced by that cold, hard resolve. After about an hour, they finished. They gathered in the living room, their faces glowing with success. Tom was flipping through his notes. He gave Jamal a knowing nod. It's a fantastic property, Jamal. Solid bones, great location. The preliminary numbers are very strong indeed. He said it just loud enough for me to overhear another calculated move in their game designed to make me feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the asset I was supposedly mismanaging. They thanked me profusely for my time. Tiffany even bent down and gave my hand a condescending pat. You were so good, Caleb. Thank you for letting us do this. It's all for the best, you'll see. As I watched them walk to the door, their shoulders were back, their steps were light. They were smug, victorious. They had gotten what they wanted. They had their number. They had the weapon they needed for the next stage of their plan. They thought they had just played me like a fiddle. The front door clicked shut and the silence returned. I sat in my chair, unmoving for a long time. The performance was draining. But as I looked at Lena's empty chair, I knew it was worth it. The hunter had successfully convinced the wolves he was nothing but a helpless sheep, and soon they would walk right into the trap. The heavy oak door of my house clicked shut, the sound echoing the closing of a chapter. Inside the car, a sleek silver Lexus SUV that smelled of leather and vanilla air freshener. Tiffany let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief. The mask of somber concern she had worn for the last hour melted away, replaced by a look of undisguised, triumphant glee. She turned to Jamal, who was starting the engine, and a wide, smug smile spread across her face. That was too easy, she said, her voice a triumphant purr. So easy. He didn't suspect a thing, not a single thing. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. Did you see his face when you mentioned the roof? He looked like a lost little puppy. It's almost sad. There was, of course, no sadness in her voice at all. Jamal pulled the car away from the curb, his knuckles white on the steering wheel for a moment before he relaxed his grip. He glanced in the rearview mirror at the house he grew up in, shrinking in the distance. He's old Tiff. And Mom's death. It really hit him hard. He's not all there right now. He said it not with pity, but with a clinical detachment, a justification for his own actions. Honestly, we'll get this done quickly. It's for the best. It's for the best for us, Tiffany corrected, pulling down the vanity mirror to check her lipstick. Let's not pretend we're doing this for him. We're saving ourselves. Did you get the alert from the bank? The mortgage payment is due Friday. Jamal winced. I saw it. I'll handle it. Handle it with what she snapped, her voice losing its purr and gaining a hard, brittle edge. Jamal, we are drowning. That commission you were counting on fell through. My credit card is maxed out from the trip to Aspen you insisted we take. We need this. That house isn't just a house. It's our lifeline. It's our ticket out of this mess. I know, he said, his voice low. I know. Tom said the preliminary numbers are strong. Very strong. That neighborhood is hot. We sell the house, pay off our debts, and we'll still have a huge chunk left over to invest. We'll be set. He was trying to convince himself as much as her. We'd better be, Tiffany said. She turned to look at him, her eyes narrowed. So what's the next step? He's agreed to the appraisal for insurance. How do we pivot to the sale? Jamal took a deep breath, slipping into his real estate agent persona. It's simple. Tom will send over the official inflated appraisal in a couple of days. We take it to Dad. We show him the number. We tell him that based on this new value, his insurance premiums will skyrocket, that his property taxes will be reassessed and go through the roof. We paint a picture of him being bled dry by expenses he can't afford on his pension. Oh, that's good, Tiffany said, a slow smile returning to her face. Very good. We make it seem like selling is his only logical option, like we're protecting him from financial ruin. Exactly, Jamal said, gaining confidence. We present him with a problem that we just so happen to have the perfect solution for. We'll tell him we've already found a potential buyer, someone willing to pay cash, a quick close, no fuss. We make it seem like a blessing, a miracle that fell right into our laps. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes on the road. A flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe a ghost of a memory, crossed his face. He built that mantelpiece with his own hands. Tiffany reached over and placed her hand on his thigh, her long nails digging in slightly. Don't go soft on me now, Jamal, she said, her voice firm. He had his life. He and your mother had 50 years in that house. It's our turn now. Think about it. This isn't just about us. It's about our future, our kids' future. Your mother would have wanted you to be secure. She would have wanted you to have the life you deserve. This is our legacy. He nodded, the flicker of doubt gone, replaced by the hard resolve she had instilled in him. He was doing the right thing. He was taking what was rightfully his. You're right, he said. You're always right. She smiled, leaning back in her seat, satisfied. I know, she said. They drove on in comfortable silence, two predators who had successfully scouted their prey, their confidence soaring. They were already spending the money in their heads, planning their future, completely oblivious to the fact that the old man in the quiet house behind them was not the prey at all. He was the hunter, and they were walking deeper and deeper into his trap. A week passed, a week of silence. I didn't hear from Jamal or Tiffany, not a single phone call to check in on their grieving old father, but I knew they weren't being idle. The silence from their end was the sound of a well-oiled machine churning in the background, preparing for the final phase of its operation. I spent the time getting my own affairs in order, making the calls Lena had instructed me to make, moving the pieces on the board that only I could see. I watered Lena's garden. I sat in my workshop, the scent of cedar calming my nerves. I waited. The waiting ended on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was a hazy, humid white, the air thick and still. I saw Jamal's Lexus pull into the driveway, but only one car door opened. He was alone. This was it. Tiffany, the strategist, had sent her soldier in to deliver the killing blow. He didn't use his key this time. He rang the doorbell, a formal, deliberate act. He wasn't coming in as a son visiting his father. He was arriving as a businessman for an appointment. I took my time answering, letting him wait on the porch, the heat of the Georgia afternoon pressing in. When I finally opened the door, I saw a man I barely recognized. The mask of the concerned son was gone completely. In its place was a hard, impersonal resolve. His eyes were cold, his jaw was set. He was dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit and was carrying a sleek leather portfolio. "Hello, Dad," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "Jamal." I replied, my own voice quiet. "I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the living room. He didn't wait for my invitation. He didn't wait for me to sit down either. He walked directly to the coffee table, the one I had built for Lena on our 20th anniversary, and placed his portfolio on it with a soft, definitive thud. He stood there waiting for me to settle into my armchair, his posture radiating an impatient corporate authority. It was a power play. He was turning my home into his boardroom, and I was the failing CEO about to be pushed out. I sat down slowly, letting out a small groan for effect, playing the part I had been rehearsing for the past week. "What is this about son?" He didn't answer right away. He opened the portfolio and took out a thick sheaf of papers, arranging them neatly on the table. One was a professionally printed brochure with a picture of smiling, silver-haired seniors on the front, their happiness looking as artificial as the perfectly green lawn they were standing on. "I've been running the numbers, Dad," he began, his tone the one he probably used with clients he was about to foreclose on. "After Tom's appraisal, it's become very clear. Financially keeping this house it doesn't make sense." I feigned confusion, a skill I was becoming quite adept at. "Doesn't make sense. It's our home, Jamal. It was a home, he corrected, his voice sharp and dismissive. Now it's an asset. A very valuable, underperforming asset that is costing you money every single day. The official appraisal came in at just over $1.2 million. He paused, letting the number hang in the air, expecting it to stun me into submission. Do you have any idea what the property taxes are going to be on that valuation? I've run the projections. They will nearly triple. Or the insurance premiums. To properly insure a property of this value, your monthly payments will be more than your entire pension check. He laid it all out, a relentless barrage of figures and percentages, twisting the excuse they had fed me earlier into a weapon against me. He spoke of capital gains and market trends of liabilities and net worth of the cost of upkeep and the inevitable repairs an old house requires. He was painting a picture of a financial prison, a house that would eat me alive, a burden that I in my dotage was incapable of managing. He wasn't talking to his father. He was talking to a balance sheet. I let him talk, nodding occasionally, my face a mask of bewildered sorrow. Inside, I was marveling at the coldness of it all. He had inherited his mother's intelligence, but none of her heart. Every word was a perfectly polished stone of logic designed to build a wall around me so high I couldn't see any other option but the one he was about to present. I waited for a pause in his monologue, a moment for him to catch his breath. "The golden years," I asked, pointing a trembling finger at the brochure. "Is that the place by the highway? Your mother and I used to say it looked so dreary." A flash of annoyance crossed his face. My feigned senility was breaking his stride, a human detail interrupting his sterile financial presentation. "It's a state-of-the-art facility, Dad. It has round-the-clock nursing staff, prepared meals, and social activities. You won't have to worry about a thing." "But I don't worry about things here," I said softly. That was it. That was the final straw for him. His patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. The cold corporate mask cracked, revealing the raw, frustrated greed beneath. He slapped his hand down on the coffee table, the sound making me jump in my seat for theatrical effect. The papers fluttered. "This isn't a negotiation," he said, his voice rising, shedding its professional calm. "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you I'm doing what has to be done, what you're not strong enough to do yourself. For God's sake, Dad, look at yourself. You're wandering around this empty house like a ghost. This is no life. I am your son, and I am making the responsible decision for you." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into me, and delivered the lines he had been rehearsing all week, the final, brutal blows. "Dad, I found a buyer for the house. A developer. It's a cash offer, very strong. They want to close in 30 days. He slid the glossy brochure for the golden years across the table towards me as if it were a prize. "I've also found you a room there. It's a lovely private suite overlooking the garden. They have 24/7 nurses. The deposit has already been paid." He spoke with an air of absolute finality, a series of pronouncements that were not open for discussion. He had planned out the remainder of my life without my consent, and was now presenting it to me as an unchangeable fact. He reached into the portfolio again and pulled out a single document and a heavy, expensive-looking pen. He placed them on the table in front of me, between us. "This is the purchase agreement," he said, his voice now dangerously calm, the calm after the storm. "It's all been taken care of. All you have to do is sign." He spoke with an air of absolute finality, a series of pronouncements that were not open for discussion. He had planned out the remainder of my life without my consent, and was now presenting it to me as an unchangeable fact. He reached into the portfolio again and pulled out a single document and a heavy, expensive-looking pen. He placed them on the table in front of me, between us. "This is the purchase agreement," he said, his voice now dangerously calm. "All you have to do is sign." The pen lay there on the polished oak of the coffee table, gleaming under the afternoon light. It was a stark black line drawn between my son and me. On his side of the table was the future he had designed, a future of convenience, of managed decline of a father neatly tucked away while his assets were liquidated. On my side was Lena. I looked at the document, the dense, unreadable block of legal text. I looked at the pen, a weapon disguised as an instrument of consent. And then I looked up at my son. I looked at him for a long, long time. I saw the expensive suit that was probably bought on credit, the faint lines of stress around his eyes that his corporate confidence couldn't quite hide. I saw the desperate hunger behind his cold facade. And I didn't feel the hot flash of anger I expected. I didn't feel the crushing shock of betrayal. In its place, a strange and profound emotion washed over me, something I hadn't anticipated at all. I felt a wave of the most heartbreaking pity I have ever known. And so I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It didn't show any teeth. It wasn't a smirk of triumph or a grin of amusement. It was a slow, sad, tired smile that started deep in my eyes and barely managed to curve the corners of my mouth. It was the smile of a carpenter who has looked at a flawed blueprint and can see every single point of failure before the first nail is even hammered. It was the smile of a man who had seen the end of the story and was filled with a deep sorrow for the characters who still thought they were in control of the plot. It was the weary, compassionate smile of a father looking at a son who had lost his way so completely that he thought this act of profound betrayal was a sign of strength, a mark of his own intelligence. The effect in the room was immediate and absolute. It was as if I had thrown a bucket of ice water on a raging fire. The aggressive, forward-moving energy that Jamal had been projecting just stopped. It hit the wall of my smile and evaporated into nothing. The power dynamic which he had so carefully constructed over the past week to place himself at the top didn't just shift. It shattered into 1,000 pieces right there on the coffee table next to his useless pen. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The color drained from his face. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. He had been prepared for yelling. He had been prepared for tears, for begging, for a desperate, angry refusal. He had even been prepared for a defeated, trembling signature. He was not prepared for this quiet, unshakable calm. He was not prepared for pity. My silence and my smile were two variables that did not exist in his equation, and their sudden appearance had caused his entire world to short-circuit. My smile held steady and unwavering. I didn't say a single word. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch, letting it fill every corner of the room. The only sound was the gentle tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, the same clock Tiffany had priced out in her head just a week before. Each tick seemed to amplify the sudden, suffocating uncertainty that was now choking the air. Tick. The predator becomes the prey. Tock. The hunter reveals himself. Tick. The trap is sprung. Jamal's confidence began to visibly crumble like a facade of dried mud cracking under a relentless sun. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He straightened his expensive silk tie, which didn't need straightening. His eyes, once so cold and direct, now darted from my face to the papers on the table and back again. He was searching for his script for his next line, but he had just realized with dawning horror that the play was not the one he had been rehearsing. The calm, frail, grieving old man was gone. In his place was someone he didn't recognize, someone who held a knowledge that he didn't, an authority that had nothing to do with money or legal documents. He was no longer the predator closing in for the kill. He was a lost child, and he was just starting to realize how deep in the woods he truly was. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on his upper lip. He licked his lips, a nervous, reflexive action. The silence was clearly a form of torture for him, now a weapon I was wielding without a single word. He had built his entire confrontation on the foundation of my expected weakness, my predictable grief. My smile had just taken a sledgehammer to that foundation, and he was now standing on crumbling ground, the abyss of the unknown opening up beneath his feet. He finally broke his voice, losing all of its cold, rehearsed authority, replaced by a note of genuine, rattled confusion that bordered on fear. "Dad." He started his voice a little shaky, a little higher than usual. He cleared his throat and tried again, attempting to regain his composure, but failing miserably. What is that? What are you smiling about?" He gestured wildly at the papers on the table, his hand trembling slightly. "This is serious. I told you I sold the house. This is a legally binding offer. There's nothing funny about this." I let my smile fade, but replaced it with the same calm, pitying expression. I leaned forward slightly in my chair, my old bones protesting, but my eyes were clear and focused. I looked at him, my son, my only child. A man so lost in the weeds of his own greed that he couldn't see the cliff just a few feet in front of him. And I felt another pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for the devastating lesson he was about to learn. He thought he was closing a deal. He had no idea he was about to open a Pandora's box that his mother had so carefully and so lovingly prepared for him. The time for silence was over. It was time to speak. I let my smile fade, but replaced it with the same calm, pitying expression. I leaned forward slightly in my chair, my old bones protesting, but my eyes were clear and focused. I looked at him, my son, my only child, a man so lost in the weeds of his own greed that he couldn't see the cliff just a few feet in front of him. And I felt another pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for the devastating lesson he was about to learn. He thought he was closing a deal. He had no idea he was about to open a Pandora's box that his mother had so carefully and so lovingly prepared for him. The time for silence was over. It was time to speak. My voice when it came out was not the frail, reedy thing I had been pretending to have for the past week. It was clear, steady, and resonant, the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime in his workshop speaking over the sound of saws and sanders. It was the voice of a man who was in complete control. "Funny," I said softly. "No, son. Nothing about this is funny. In fact, it's a tragedy." I pushed myself up from my armchair, my movements slow and deliberate, but not weak. I stood to my full height, looking my son directly in the eye. For the first time since the funeral, he wasn't looking down on me. We were equals, and he looked terrified. I'm not smiling because I find this amusing. I continued, taking a slow step toward the coffee table that separated us. "I'm smiling because for the first time I see you exactly as your mother predicted I would. I see the plan you've laid out with such meticulous detail." I gestured to the papers on the table. "A cash offer from a developer, a quick 30-day close, a room at the Golden Years with a lovely garden view, I'm sure. The deposit is already paid," you said. "You've been very thorough, Jamal. Very methodical. You've planned out every last detail of my life as if it were a business transaction to be finalized. You've assessed the assets, calculated the returns, and arranged for the disposal of the primary obstacle, me." I let the words hang in the air. His face was a mask of disbelief. The script was gone. The roles were reversed. He was no longer the one in charge of this meeting. "You have boxed up my future," I said, my voice dropping lower. "You've put a price tag on it and you've sold it to the highest bidder. You've done your work with a cold, admirable efficiency. And for that, I suppose you should be commended. You've become the ruthless businessman you and Tiffany always wanted you to be." I paused, letting him absorb the shock, letting him understand that the frail, confused old man he thought he was dealing with had been an illusion. "But you've overlooked one thing," I said, my voice now barely a whisper, forcing him to lean in, to strain to hear the words that would bring his world crashing down. "A very, very important detail in your otherwise flawless plan." I looked him straight in the eye, the pity I felt for him now mixing with the cold, hard steel of Lena's final promise. "You see, son, while you were so busy packing up my future, I've been busy too. I've already finished my packing. But it wasn't my things I was packing." The confusion on his face was absolute. His mind was scrambling, trying to process the words, trying to find a threat in them, but coming up empty. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I gave him no time to recover. "I've been packing up your mother's legacy," I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. "Everything she wanted, every wish she had, every last, brilliant detail she planned for a day just like this. The day you would finally show us who you've become." I gestured around the room at the furniture he had appraised, the walls that held our history. "You see all this. You see this house, this furniture, these memories. You think you're selling a building. You think you've calculated its value down to the last dollar. But you have no idea what's really for sale. You have no idea what you've just done." I left him standing there, his perfect plan in tatters, his face a canvas of dawning horror. He was starting to realize that he wasn't the one holding the pen. He was just a pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before he ever thought of it, a game designed by a brilliant woman whose love for her family was so fierce it had reached out from beyond the grave to protect it. And he had just made his final, fatal move. I had let the words hang in the air, each one a stone dropping into the deep, still water of my son's arrogance. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum where his confidence used to be. He stared at me, his face a canvas of dawning horror. His mind, so quick and calculating just moments before, was now visibly scrambling, trying to process a variable that had never been part of his equation. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed world he had built for himself over the past few weeks, a world in which he was the predator and I was the prey, had just been hit by an earthquake. And he was standing at the epicenter, feeling the ground beneath his feet give way. Packing, he finally stammered the word, barely a whisper. "What are you talking about? What legacy? What plan?" I gave him a slow, sad nod and gestured to the chair opposite mine. "Sit down, Jamal. It's a long story, and it's time you heard it." He hesitated for a moment, then sank into the chair, his movements stiff and uncertain. He was no longer the one in control. He was a spectator now, waiting for the curtain to rise on a play he never knew he was a part of. "This wasn't my plan, son." I began, my voice calm and steady. "This was your mother's. It all started a little over a year ago, not with a bang, but with a whisper she overheard while you and Tiffany thought she was napping." My mind drifted back, and the living room around me faded, replaced by the memory as sharp and clear as a photograph. It was a bright spring afternoon, and Lena was in the sunroom, resting in her favorite wicker chair with a book on her lap, her eyes closed. Tiffany was in the kitchen, talking on her phone, her voice a low, urgent hum. I was in the workshop at the time, but Lena told me all about it later that evening, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. She was talking to her sister, Lena had said, her hands tightly gripping her teacup. She was complaining about money, about the lease on her luxury car being almost up. And then she laughed, Caleb. She laughed and said, "Don't worry, it's just a temporary liquidity problem. We're just waiting for the main estate to mature. We're exploring options for a bridge loan leveraging future assets to cover our current obligations." Lena had looked at me, her eyes searching mine. She was talking about us, Caleb. We are the main estate. She was talking about borrowing money against the value of this house against our home before I'm even gone. I remember trying to find another explanation, any other explanation. Maybe you misheard, honey. Maybe she was talking about her own parents. No, Lena had said, her voice cutting through my denial with a surgeon's precision. Her tone, it was proprietary. It was the sound of someone who already believed they were the owner of something. The sound of someone counting their chickens before they'd hatched. And we, my love, are the chickens. That conversation changed everything. 2 days later, we were sitting in the downtown office of Maya Jones Esquire. The office was on the 25th floor of a glass and steel building a world away from our old lawyer Henderson's dusty wood-paneled office. It was modern, minimalist, and efficient, just like the woman who sat across from us. Maya was a young, sharp African-American woman in a tailored navy suit with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. We didn't waste time with small talk. Lena, with the precision of the accountant she used to be, laid out her case. She didn't speak of feelings or suspicions. She spoke of facts of evidence. On December 24th, at our Christmas Eve dinner, Lena began looking at a small notebook she had brought. Tiffany asked me, in a very casual way, if I'd ever had my mother's jewelry appraised. When I said no, she remarked that it's always good to know the value of things for insurance purposes. On February 12th, she continued, Jamal came over for Sunday dinner. He brought a printout of recent home sales in our neighborhood. He presented it as interesting news about how the area was developing. But every house on the list was a 2-story colonial just like ours. They were comps, Caleb. He was doing his homework. I remembered that. I'd thought he was just making conversation. On March 3rd, Lena went on, her voice steady. I overheard the phone call about leveraging future assets. And last month, Tiffany asked me where we kept the original deed to the house. She said she was doing a course on family history and wanted to see it. Lena closed her notebook and looked at Maya. Individually, these are small things, a curious question, a casual conversation. But together they form a pattern of assessment, a pattern of impatience, a pattern of greed. I watched Maya listen, her focus absolute. She didn't interrupt. She just absorbed every word, her expression unreadable, occasionally making a small note on a legal pad with a silver pen. When Lena was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Maya leaned forward, her hands clasped on the glass desk. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. She said, her voice resonating with a quiet authority that instantly commanded respect. Your instincts are correct. What you're describing are classic red flags for what the law calls undue influence and anticipatory inheritance abuse. It's a subtle but very real form of elder exploitation, where potential heirs begin to treat their living relatives as if they are already part of an estate to be managed and eventually liquidated. Hearing our vague fears given a cold legal name sent a chill down my spine. It made it real. They see you, Maya said, looking from Lena to me, not as parents, but as gatekeepers to a lifestyle they feel they are entitled to. And your son's wife appears to be the primary driver of this. The good news is you've come to me early. You are both of sound mind and body. We have time to build a fortress. A fortress, I asked. Exactly. Maya said, a small, confident smile on her lips. A series of legal and financial structures that will protect you and your assets completely. It will make your wishes for the future ironclad, and it will remove any possibility for them to take advantage of the situation now or after one of you is gone. Before we discuss solutions like irrevocable trusts or LLCs, the first thing we need to do is a complete audit of all your assets and a thorough review of all existing legal documents. I'm particularly interested in any power of attorney you may have signed in the past, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time. We need to know the exact layout of the battlefield before we draw our lines of defense. I remember leaving that office feeling both terrified and relieved. Terrified that my wife's fears were real, but relieved that we had found a general to help us fight the war. I brought my focus back to the present, to my living room, to my son's pale and stricken face. He was still staring at me, waiting for an explanation. That meeting, son, I said softly, was the day the first brick of your mother's fortress was laid. I watched my son's face, the gears in his mind grinding, trying to find a foothold in a world that had just been turned upside down. A fortress. He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. What are you talking about? The first brick of your mother's fortress, son, I said, my voice low and even, was the most important. It was the one that made everything you've done for the past few weeks, the appraisal, the secret meetings, this little performance right here, completely and utterly meaningless. It was the day nearly a year ago that your mother and I took this house off the market, forever. The memory washed over me, not hazy, but sharp and vivid. We were back in Maya Jones's office, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk outside her panoramic window. A thick stack of documents sat on her glass desk, bound in a neat blue folder. The top page read, The Vance Family Heritage Trust. Maya looked at us, her expression serious. I want to be perfectly clear before you sign, she said, her voice precise. This is an irrevocable trust. The word irrevocable is not just legal jargon. It means it cannot be undone. Once you sign these papers, the ownership of your home at 125 Magnolia Drive is legally transferred to the trust. It will no longer belong to you and Lena as individuals. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Not own my own house, the house I built. The floors I laid, the walls that held 50 years of my life. It felt wrong, like a betrayal of the very idea of home. Maya seemed to read my mind. You will be the lifetime trustees and sole beneficiaries, she explained gently. That means you retain absolute control. You can live here, you can renovate, you can paint the walls purple if you want to. Nothing about your day-to-day life will change. What will change is that the house is no longer a personal asset. It is an asset of the trust. It cannot be used as collateral for a loan by anyone. It cannot be seized by creditors. And most importantly, it cannot be sold by an individual, not even by you, without following the strict rules laid out in the trust agreement. The trust is its own legal entity, and its only purpose is to preserve the family home as a residence as per Mrs. Vance's explicit instructions. I looked at Lena. She was calm, her hands resting peacefully in her lap, but I could see the steel in her eyes. This was her will being forged into a legal reality. I thought about Jamal, my son, and a wave of deep, profound sadness washed over me. The fact that we were here in this cold office signing papers to protect ourselves from our own child, it felt like a monumental failure. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the heavy, expensive pen Maya offered me. It's okay, Caleb, Lena said softly, placing her hand over mine. Her hand was cool, but her grip was steady. This is not an act of distrust. It's an act of protection. For you, and in a way for him too. I looked into her eyes and saw no doubt, only a sorrowful certainty. I took the pen. The ink flowed black and final, my signature looking like a stranger's on the page. In that moment, I legally gave away my home in order to save it. The next part of Lena's performance was worthy of an Oscar. A few weeks later, we had Jamal and Tiffany over for Sunday dinner. The whole evening was a carefully constructed play. Lena made Jamal's favorite meal pot roast with sweet potatoes. We made small talk about his work, about Tiffany's volunteer committee, about the weather. It was all painfully, superficially normal. Then over dessert, Lena casually dropped the bombshell, wrapping it in the most boring, tedious packaging imaginable. "Oh, that reminds me," she said, as if just remembering something. "Jamal, Tiffany, your father and I had a meeting with old Mr. Henderson the other day." She lied so smoothly, never mentioning Maya Jones. Using Henderson's name was a stroke of genius. He was a familiar, non-threatening part of their world. "He's getting on in years, and he's been nagging us about our estate planning. He advised us to put the house into a simple family trust, something about making probate court easier for you down the line. A lot of legal paperwork, but he says it will save you a big headache in the future." She waved her hand dismissively as if talking about plumbing repairs. "So we did it. The house is in the Vance Family Heritage Trust now. You won't have to worry about any of it for a long, long time, thank God." I watched their faces. They exchanged a small, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look of shared victory. Jamal, the real estate expert, leaned back in his chair, a knowing, slightly condescending smile on his face. "Oh, a revocable living trust?" he asked, already assuming he knew best. "Yeah, that's standard estate planning." "Good idea, Mom. It keeps things clean, avoids probate." Henderson's old school, but he knows his stuff. He completely missed the significance of the word I had heard so clearly in Maya's office, irrevocable. To him, a trust was just a box to hold the assets until he was ready to open it. Tiffany was even more effusively positive, her eyes shining with greed. "That's so responsible of you both," she said, reaching over to pat Lena's hand. "We're just so glad you're thinking ahead and making things simple for everyone." For us is what she meant, and we all knew it. Their confidence, their arrogance was so absolute. They thought this was a step in their favor, a neat little package that would make their eventual inheritance even easier to unwrap. I remember after they left that night, Lena and I stood in the kitchen washing the dishes in comfortable silence. She looked over at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. "They took the bait," she said softly. The memory faded, and I was back in the present, looking at my son's shocked, pale face. He was still processing the words, his mind refusing to accept the implications. "You thought it was a simple trust, a headache saver?" I said, my voice cutting through his confusion. "You never bothered to ask the right questions. You never bothered to read the fine print. You never understood that your mother wasn't saving you a headache. She was building a wall. And you, son, you just ran into it at full speed." Jamal stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. "A wall? What are you talking about? What trust?" The words tumbled out, a frantic search for an explanation that made sense in his world, a world where he held all the cards. "The Vance Family Heritage Trust, son," I said, my voice calm and even. "The one you and Tiffany were so happy about. The one you thought was just a simple way to avoid probate. It was never about making things simple, Jamal. It was about making them impossible. Impossible for you." I let that sink in, watching the dawning horror in his eyes. But I knew the first wall of Lena's fortress, the trust, was only the beginning. There was more. There was the escape plan. She had built a secret so well kept that not even a hint of it existed in their calculated world. My mind drifted back again, this time to a rainy Saturday when the sky over Atlanta was the color of wet slate. Lena had been feeling a bit stronger that week. "I'm tired of being cooped up in this house, Caleb," she'd said, a mischievous glint in her eye I hadn't seen in months. "Let's go for a drive, a long one. Just us." I was happy to see her feeling better, so I didn't ask any questions. I just helped her into the car, and we drove. We drove for over an hour, out past the sprawling suburbs and the endless strip malls, heading northeast, the city receding in the rearview mirror. The conversation was light, about old times, about the garden, about everything and nothing. It felt like one of our old Sunday drives, spontaneous and free. Finally, she directed me to turn down a long, winding gravel road I had never seen before, the tires crunching softly. The road was lined with tall, whispering pine trees, their branches heavy with rain. It opened up, and there on the shores of Lake Lanier was a small, secluded property. It was a beautiful, modest cabin built of dark cedar nestled amongst the trees, with a wide, screened-in porch overlooking the still gray water. "Pull in here," she said. "What is this place?" I asked. My voice filled with awe. It felt a world away from everything, a pocket of quiet peace. "This is our real home, Caleb," she said, turning to me, a rare, triumphant smile on her face. "Well, soon to be your home. I bought it 6 months ago." I was stunned. I just stared at her, my mind unable to process the words. "How with what money I look at our bank statements, Lena?" There hasn't been a withdrawal big enough for a down payment on a tool shed, let alone this. With the inheritance my mother left me, she explained, turning off the engine. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic patter of rain on the car roof. I never mixed it with our joint accounts. I kept it separate in its own investment fund for a day, just like this. I bought it through an LLC, a limited liability company that has no legal connection to our name. This place is a ghost, Caleb. It doesn't exist in their world. If the worst ever happens, if they ever make the big house unbearable, this is where you will go. This is your sanctuary. We got out of the car, an old quilt draped over our heads to shield us from the rain, and she showed me around. The inside was simple, furnished with comfortable, sturdy pieces. It smelled of pine and fresh paint. There was a large stone fireplace with a stack of seasoned firewood already waiting beside it. And in a small room off the back, a room with a large window that looked out onto the lake, was a brand new, fully equipped workshop. A heavy-duty table saw a drill press a lathe. It was a carpenter's dream, far better than the cramped space I had in our garage. For you, she'd said, her voice soft. So you can keep building things. So you can have peace. So you can hear the sound of the water instead of the sound of their greed. I remember standing there in the middle of that workshop, my hand resting on the smooth, cool steel of the new table saw, and I was speechless. I was overwhelmed by the depth of her foresight, by the sheer fierce power of her love. She wasn't just planning for a legal battle. She was planning for my life, for my soul. She knew that without my work, without a place to create, a part of me would wither and die. How did you even manage all this? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Maya helped with the LLC, she said. And I've been paying for it with the dividends from my mother's old stock portfolio. Jamal and Tiffany have never seen those statements. They don't even know the portfolio exists. To them, this place is completely invisible. We stood on the screened-in porch for a long time, watching the rain dance on the surface of the lake. It was the most peaceful I had felt in months. This is the second wall of the fortress, Caleb, she had whispered, leaning her head on my shoulder. The first wall, the trust, is to keep them out. This wall is to keep you safe. A place they can never touch, never even find. A place where you can be free of them. The memory dissolved, and I was back in my living room, the scent of cedar from my imaginary workshop replaced by the stale, tense air of the confrontation. My son was still staring at me, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning dread. I looked at him, my voice softening. Your mother didn't just build a fortress to keep you out, son. She also built a sanctuary for me. A second wall, you might say. A place completely beyond your reach, completely invisible to you and your wife. A place she bought with money you never knew existed through a company you'll never be able to trace. I let him absorb that another piece of his reality crumbling away. He thought he knew the layout of the battlefield, the size of the prize. He was just starting to realize he had been looking at the wrong map all along. Jamal stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. A wall. What are you talking about? What trust? A sanctuary. What are you talking about? The words tumbled out a frantic search for an explanation that made sense in his world. A world where he held all the cards. The Vance Family Heritage Trust, son. I said, my voice calm and even. The one you and Tiffany were so happy about. The one you thought was just a simple way to avoid probate. It was never about making things simple, Jamal. It was about making them impossible. Impossible for you. I let that sink in, watching the dawning horror in his eyes as he began to understand the scale of the game he was in. He looked at me, searching for the frail, confused old man he thought he knew, the one he had so easily manipulated just a week ago. He had no idea that man was a character, a role I had been taught to play by the most brilliant director I had ever known. My mind drifted back one last time to the final, most important part of Lena's plan, the creation of her lead actor. It was in her last weeks. The fortress of trusts and secret accounts had been built. The legal walls were in place. But Lena knew that none of it would matter if the gatekeeper himself gave the enemy the key. That gatekeeper was me. I remember sitting by her bedside, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. She had been weaker that day, her voice a fragile whisper. You have to be the final piece of the puzzle, Caleb, she'd said, her eyes intense, burning with a fierce light that defied the weakness of her body. All these legal walls mean nothing if you give the game away. You must be my actor. An actor, Lena, I had said, stroking her hand. I'm a carpenter. I can't act. Oh, yes, you can. She'd insisted, a faint, mischievous smile playing on her lips. It was the smile I had fallen in love with 50 years ago. You've been acting for years. You act like you enjoy Tiffany's dry casserole. You act like you're interested when Jamal talks about his sales commissions. This is just one more role, the most important one of your life. And so our rehearsals began. In that quiet, sunlit room with the scent of antiseptic and fading roses in the air, my dying wife became my acting coach. First, she said, her voice raspy, the physicality. You're 75, but you hold yourself like you're 55. I need you to slump just a little. When you walk, lean on the furniture. Let them see you as unsteady. Make them feel like they have to physically support you. It will feed their sense of superiority. So I practiced. I would walk across the room, my back straight out of habit, and she would gently correct me. No, honey, more of a shuffle. Let your feet drag a little. That's it. Perfect. Then came the motivation. Your character's motivation is grief, she explained, as if we were in a theater class. Everything you do, every confused look, every missed word is because you're heartbroken. Let them believe that. It's the one truth they won't question. They will see your grief as a weakness they can exploit. We will use it as a shield. The most difficult and most heartbreaking part of our rehearsals was running through the scenarios. Lena, with her sharp mind, had anticipated their every move. She would play the part of Tiffany, her voice becoming high and saccharine. "Okay, I'm Tiffany now," she'd say, fluffing her pillow. "Oh, Caleb, we were just so worried about you, and we think we should get the house appraised just for insurance purposes, to protect your assets." She would then look at me, her eyes wide and expectant. My first attempt was a disaster. I don't think that's a good idea, Tiffany," I had said, my voice firm. Lena shook her head. No. Too direct. That's the old Caleb, the carpenter, the man who knows his own mind. The new Caleb is confused. He's overwhelmed. He doesn't understand these things. Try again. Look away. Seem tired. Say something like, "Insurance? Oh my. That sounds so complicated." So I tried again. And again, until I could produce a look of weary confusion on command. Then she would switch characters. "All right, now I'm Jamal," she'd say, her voice becoming lower, more earnest. "Dad, we've found a wonderful community for you. It has nurses-prepared meals, everything you need. We've already put down a deposit." My instinct was to roar, to tell this imaginary version of my son how dared he. But Lena coached me. "Don't get angry, Caleb. Anger is a sign of strength. We can't have that. You must look sad, betrayed but weak. Look out the window. Talk about a memory. Say something like, 'But your mother, she loved the garden here.' Make them feel guilty but not threatened. Make them feel like they are being responsible, like they are making a hard choice for your own good. Their guilt is a weakness, but their self-righteousness is an even bigger one. We want to feed the second one." In her final days, the lesson became more serious. The dark humor faded, replaced by a raw urgency. She held my hand, her grip weak, but her gaze unwavering. "This isn't just a game, my love. This is a war for your peace, for the dignity of our life together. And in this war, their greatest weapon is their belief that they are smarter than you, that you are just a simple old man who worked with his hands. They will underestimate you. That is the entire foundation of their plan. Never, ever let them think otherwise. Not until the very last moment. Promise me, Caleb. Promise me you won't let them see the king until it's time for checkmate." The memory of her voice, so full of love and fierce intelligence, faded, and I was back in my living room. I looked at Jamal's confused, panicked face. He was still searching for the simple old man, the pawn he thought he could easily sweep off the board. He had no idea he was facing a king that his own mother had crowned. My performance was over. The rehearsal was done. It was time for the final act. I had always been an early riser. It's a habit you get into when you work with your hands, a rhythm set by the rising sun, not an alarm clock. But on this morning, the last morning I was awake before the first hint of gray light touched the window pane. I lay in bed in the guest room where I'd been sleeping for the past few days and listened to the silence. It was a different silence now. It wasn't the heavy, grief-stricken quiet that had descended after Lena's passing. This was a hollow, echoing silence. The silence of a space that has been emptied of its soul. Today was the day. Moving day. The day my son Jamal and his wife Tiffany believed they would be escorting me to a sterile room in a place called Golden Years, leaving the life I had built to be dismantled and sold to the highest bidder. I felt a pang of sadness, a deep, aching sorrow for the man my son had become. But beneath the sadness there was no fear. There was only a calm, cold certainty, a sense of purpose that had been my constant companion for the past few weeks. Today was not an ending. It was a reckoning. I got up and dressed, not in the sweatpants and old t-shirt of a man defeated, but in a pair of crisp trousers and a freshly ironed button-down shirt. I made my way into the living room. The sight, even though I had orchestrated it, still took my breath away for a moment. It was empty. The grand sofa where we'd watched 50 years of television, the heavy oak coffee table I'd built, the bookshelves overflowing with Lena's novels. All gone. The only things left were the faint outlines on the walls where our family photos had hung for decades, pale ghosts of a life that was no longer there. The morning light streamed in through the large bay window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the vacant space. The room felt huge, like a grand empty ballroom waiting for a dance that would never come. I walked through the archway into the dining room, also empty. I ran my hand along the wall, my fingers finding the series of small pencil marks on the door frame, a faint ladder charting Jamal's growth from a small boy who barely reached my knee to a tall young man who towered over his mother. I remembered Lena's laughter as she'd stretch the measuring tape, Jamal standing on his tiptoes to try and gain an extra inch. So many celebrations, so many arguments, so many holidays had been shared around a table that was no longer there. The crystal chandelier Tiffany had coveted was gone, replaced by a simple bare bulb hanging from a wire. I continued into the kitchen. The granite countertops Tiffany had admired were bare. The spice rack Lena had filled with exotic flavors from her travels was gone. I could almost smell the ghost of her famous sweet potato pie, could almost hear her humming a tune as she kneaded dough on the butcher block island that now stood empty. For a moment the grief was sharp, a physical pain in my chest. This was more than just an empty house. This was the systematic erasure of a life, our life. But then I remembered her voice as clear as if she were standing beside me. It's just wood and stone, Caleb. We built it once, but the love, the memories, we carry those with us. They can't pack that into a truck. Her words were a balm to my aching heart, a reminder of the mission. This wasn't a surrender. It was a strategic withdrawal. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every rug had been moved over the past week by a small, discreet team of movers I had hired, men loyal to a friend of Maya Jones. They had worked in the quiet of the night, carefully wrapping and transporting 50 years of our life to a secure storage facility, while my son and his wife slept soundly, dreaming of their inheritance. The only piece of furniture I had left in the entire house was my old worn leather armchair, the one Lena always said was molded to the shape of my stubbornness. It sat alone in the middle of the empty living room, looking small and defiant. I walked over to it and sat down. By the front door was a single small duffel bag containing a change of clothes and my shaving kit. It was the perfect prop for the final act of my performance. I sat there in my solitary chair in my empty house, and I waited. I thought about Lena. I thought about the promise I had made to her. This wasn't an act of revenge. Lena wasn't a vengeful woman. This was an act of profound, painful love. It was a lesson, the final, most difficult lesson a parent can teach a child, the lesson of consequences. She had known that simply giving Jamal a lecture or cutting him off would do nothing. He had to feel the full, crushing weight of his own choices. He had to reach for the prize he had sacrificed his own father for, only to find it turned to dust in his hands. I didn't have to wait long. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced their arrival. I heard 2 car doors slam, then another heavier van door slide open. The sound of voices, confident and cheerful. I closed my eyes and took one last deep breath, drawing strength from the memory of my wife's fierce love. I smoothed down my shirt, arranged my face into a mask of weary resignation, and prepared to greet the vultures. The storm had arrived, and I was ready. I heard their footsteps on the porch, followed by the sharp, impatient ring of the doorbell. I took my time getting up, letting my old bones protest, leaning heavily on the arms of the chair. I shuffled to the door, my movements slow and deliberate. When I opened it, the scene was exactly as I had pictured. Jamal and Tiffany stood on the porch, beaming, their faces glowing with a triumphant, proprietary glee. Behind them on the walkway stood 2 large men in matching blue jumpsuits, looking bored and impatient. And behind them, parked at the curb, was a moving truck, its large back door rolled open like a hungry mouth, ready to devour the remains of my life. "There he is," Tiffany chirped, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "Ready for the big day, Caleb. We're here to make everything as smooth as possible for you. No stress allowed today. She was radiating the smug satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. I looked past her at the gaping maw of the truck. I let my face fall, my shoulders slump. A truck, I said, my voice a frail whisper. It all seems so final. It's a new beginning, Dad, Jamal said, stepping forward. He put his arm around my shoulders, not in a hug, but in a gesture of control, of steering me back into the house. It's the most efficient way to do this. We'll have your things moved into your new room at Golden Years in no time. You won't have to lift a finger. We've got it all under control. My things, I thought. The words were so condescending, so dismissive of a life's worth of possessions. They guided me back to my lone armchair and sat me down as if I were a fragile doll. You just sit here, Caleb, and don't you worry about a thing, Tiffany said, patting my hand. We'll direct the movers. We know what's important to you. The arrogance was breathtaking. They stood in the middle of my living room, the conquerors of a kingdom they thought they had won. Jamal turned to the two movers who were now standing awkwardly in the doorway. All right, guys, Jamal said, clapping his hands together in a show of efficiency. It's a pretty light load. We're just taking this armchair here, the small duffel bag by the door, and that floor lamp over in the corner. That's it. Everything else is staying for the new owners. The movers exchanged a confused glance. They were used to packing up entire houses, not just a handful of items. Tiffany, sensing their confusion, added with a laugh, He's downsizing, getting rid of a lifetime of clutter. It's very liberating, isn't it, Caleb? I just looked at her, my face a mask of sorrow. Inside my heart was a block of ice. They were talking about me in the third person as if I were a piece of furniture myself, an object to be managed and moved according to their will. Jamal walked around the empty space, a satisfied look on his face. See, Dad, simple. We've already arranged for your new room to be set up. It's a bit smaller than this, of course, but it's cozy. You'll have a nice view of the parking lot, and you won't have to worry about cleaning or cooking. It's all taken care of. So cozy, Tiffany added, her smile never faltering. And we'll come visit all the time. We'll bring you your favorite cereal. She winked as if sharing a private joke. They were so wrapped up in their victory, so blinded by their greed, that they didn't even seem to notice the most obvious thing in the world. The house was already empty. Their minds had a script, and they were sticking to it, unable to process a reality that didn't fit their narrative. They saw what they expected to see, a house full of valuable things that were about to become theirs. After giving her final instructions, Tiffany came over to me one last time. She crouched down, bringing her face close to mine, her voice dropping to a low, patronizing coo. Now don't you be sad, she said, as one might speak to a crying child. This is a good thing, a new beginning for you, and for us. The last part was said with an unguarded sincerity that was more damning than any of her lies. She stood up and turned to Jamal, her eyes shining. Okay, I think we're ready. Jamal nodded, his face beaming with pride and relief. He turned to the movers who were still standing in the doorway, looking utterly baffled by the scene. All right, guys, he said, his voice full of a false, cheerful authority. Let's get started. Head on in. Jamal gestured grandly with his hand. All right, guys, he said, his voice full of a false, cheerful authority. Let's get started. Head on in. I sat perfectly still in my armchair, the solitary king on my empty chessboard, and I watched. The two movers, a big burly man with a thick beard and a younger, lankier one, exchanged another confused look, shrugged, and stepped over the threshold. They stopped dead just inside the doorway. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with a confusion that was rapidly becoming uncomfortable. I could see the muscles in the bigger man's shoulders tense up. He slowly took off his baseball cap and scratched his head, his eyes wide as he scanned the cavernous, empty space of my living room. From the porch, Jamal's impatience was growing. He was on a schedule, his victory lap had a timetable, and these men were falling behind. What are you waiting for? He called out, a sharp, irritated edge to his voice. Let's get this show on the road. We're on the clock here. The younger mover turned, his face a perfect picture of bewilderment. He looked at Jamal, then at the empty room, then back at Jamal. Boss? He said, his voice hesitant. What exactly are we supposed to be moving? What do you mean? What are you moving? Jamal snapped, his arrogance blinding him to the obvious. The furniture. Let's start with the big sofa, the bookshelves, His voice trailed off as he finally stepped into the house himself to see what the holdup was. He froze. I watched the sequence of emotions play out on his face, a silent film of a man's world collapsing in on itself. First, there was simple, dumbfounded confusion. His eyes scanned the living room, trying to make sense of the empty space, the bare walls, the stark emptiness that greeted him. His brain, which had a very clear picture of what this room was supposed to look like, was refusing to process the reality in front of him. Tiffany, sensing a problem, pushed past him. "Jamal, what's wrong?" she started to say, but the words died in her throat as she took in the scene. A sharp, audible gasp escaped her lips. What is this?" Jamal didn't answer. He was like a man in a trance. He walked forward, his expensive dress shoes echoing loudly on the bare hardwood floors. He walked to the center of the room and turned in a slow circle, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the pale rectangles on the walls where our family photos had hung for 50 years. He looked at the lighter patch of wood on the floor where the large area rug used to be. He looked at my solitary armchair sitting in the middle of it all like a silent monument. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He spun around and rushed into the dining room. I heard his footsteps stop, abruptly followed by a choked sound of disbelief. A moment later, he was in the kitchen. I could hear him opening cabinet doors, the sound of them banging shut one after another, each one a small explosion of his unraveling composure. Tiffany, meanwhile, was paralyzed in the living room, her face a mask of horror. Her eyes darted around the room, not with the calculating gaze of an appraiser anymore, but with the frantic panic of a looter who has just discovered the treasure vault has already been emptied. "The clock," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The grandfather clock is gone. The chandelier." "Caleb, where is the chandelier?" Jamal stormed back into the living room, his face flushed with a mixture of panic and rising rage. His eyes finally landed on me, sitting there quietly watching his meltdown. For a moment his mind grasped for a logical, albeit incorrect explanation. "Dad," he yelled, his voice cracking. "What happened? Where is everything? Were we robbed? Did someone break in?" Tiffany's mind went in a different direction. Her greed was so absolute that she couldn't imagine anyone else being the culprit. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, the sweet condescending facade completely stripped away. "What did you do? Where is all the furniture? Where is it, you old man?" That was my cue. The performance was over. The time for playing the frail, confused old man had come to an end. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my hands on the arms of my chair. I pushed myself up, not with the groaning effort of a feeble 75-year-old, but with a smooth, steady strength that seemed to surprise even me. I rose to my full height, my back straight, my shoulders back. The physical transformation was as shocking to them as any words I could have said. They both took an involuntary step back. I looked at my son, at his face contorted with rage and confusion. I looked at my daughter-in-law, her features twisted into an ugly mask of greed and hysteria. The pity I had felt for them was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I took a slow step towards them. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not the whisper they had grown accustomed to. It was the clear, steady voice of a man who was, for the first time in a long time, completely and utterly in control of his own house. "Robbed." I said, my voice calm, but with an edge of steel they had never heard before. No son, nothing was stolen here. Everything was simply moved, according to plan. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the confusion in their eyes deepen. My plan. I watched them, my son and his wife, their faces a mixture of panic and rage. They were cornered animals, their minds scrambling to understand how the trap they had so carefully set for me had just sprung shut on them instead. The two movers who had been paid to haul furniture were now the unwilling audience to a family drama that was rapidly spiraling out of their pay grade. They stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes wide, looking back and forth between me and my son. Plan. Jamal finally stammered the word, catching in his throat. "What plan? What did you do, Dad? Where is all the furniture?" He was still grasping for a logical explanation, his mind defaulting to the tangible, to the missing objects, unable to comprehend the larger, invisible game he had lost. Tiffany, however, was already a step ahead of him. Her greed gave her a sharper instinct for disaster. She wasn't asking about the furniture anymore. She was looking at my face, at the calm certainty in my eyes, and she knew this was about more than just missing tables and chairs. "Jamal, shut up," she hissed, her eyes locked on me. "Let him talk." I gave her a small, sad nod of acknowledgement. In her own predatory way, she was intelligent. I walked slowly over to the coffee table where the purchase agreement lay, the pen resting beside it like a surrendered weapon. I picked up the thick sheaf of papers, the document my son had proudly called a legally binding offer. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of its uselessness. This document, I began, my voice calm and even, the voice of a man explaining a blueprint, is worthless. It's a very official-looking, very expensive piece of paper that documents an agreement to sell something that the seller doesn't actually own. Jamal's face flushed with anger. What are you talking about? It's your house. I have power of attorney. It's all legal. He was a real estate agent. This was an attack on his professional pride, the one thing he had left. No son. It's not my house, I said gently. Not anymore. And it hasn't been for almost a year. I let the words hang in the air. The movers were now slowly backing out of the doorway, wanting no part of what was about to happen. Almost a year ago, I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the empty room. Your mother and I sat in a lawyer's office, and we placed this house, this property, and everything on it into the Vance Family Heritage Trust. I am the trustee and the lifetime beneficiary. But the house itself, the legal ownership of this building and this land, belongs to the trust. I cannot sell it. You cannot sell it. No one can. Its only purpose, as mandated by the trust your mother so brilliantly created, is to remain the Vance family home, to be preserved, not sold. Jamal shook his head, a desperate, dismissive laugh escaping his lips. A trust. A living trust. Dad, that doesn't mean anything. Those can be amended. They can be dissolved. That's just basic estate planning. I held up a hand to stop him. For the first time, I cut him off, and the shock on his face was profound. It's not a revocable living trust, son, I said, and I delivered the word that was the cornerstone of Lena's entire fortress. It's an irrevocable trust. A fortress, Jamal, with walls of solid legal steel. Your mother was very, very thorough. She knew you were good at your job, so she hired someone who was better. As if on cue, the doorbell rang again, its cheerful chiming sound a bizarre counterpoint to the tense, shattered atmosphere in the room. Jamal and Tiffany both jumped, their nerves frayed. I, however, was expecting it. Excuse me, I said politely. I walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch, looking sharp and professional in a dark pantsuit and holding her own leather portfolio, was Maya Jones. She gave me a small, reassuring nod and then looked past me, her eyes locking onto Jamal. Right on time, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Maya walked into the living room, her presence immediately commanding the space. She was the embodiment of a power that Jamal and Tiffany could not understand, a power based not on bluster and manipulation, but on intelligence, preparation, and the unassailable authority of the law. She walked directly to the center of the room and addressed my son, her voice professional, sharp, and utterly devoid of emotion. Mr. Vance, she said, and it took Jamal a moment to realize she was talking to him. I am Maya Jones, counsel for the Vance Family Heritage Trust. My client, Mr. Caleb Vance, has informed me of your attempt to fraudulently execute a sale on a property belonging to the trust. Fraudulently. The word hit Jamal like a physical blow. He actually stumbled back a step. Maya opened her portfolio. I have a copy of the full binding and notarized trust agreement here for your review, she said, placing a thick document on the coffee table with a definitive thud that seemed to shake the entire room. I would draw your attention to Article 4, Section B, which clearly states the irrevocable nature of the trust and the specific prohibitions against any sale or leveraging of the primary property. I also have a cease and desist letter which I am serving you now, ordering you to halt all proceedings related to this illegal sale. She handed him another envelope. He took it with a trembling hand, his face the color of ash. Any further action on your part or on the part of your prospective buyer, Maya continued, her voice like ice, will result in immediate legal consequences. We will pursue damages against you for breach of fiduciary duty, and we will not hesitate to report this matter to the State Real Estate Board, which I am sure would be very interested to learn about one of its agents attempting to commit real estate fraud against his own elderly father. She looked from Jamal's horrified face to Tiffany's, who looked as if she were about to faint. The first wall of Lena's fortress had just been revealed, and it was absolute. Jamal stood there holding the thick legal document as if it were a venomous snake. His face, which had been flushed with anger just moments before, was now a pale, ashen gray. The color had drained from it, leaving behind a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. He looked from the papers in his trembling hand to Maya Jones, then to me, then back to the papers. He was a real estate agent. He lived and breathed contracts, clauses, and loopholes. And he knew with a certainty that was clearly terrifying him that the document he was holding was an ironclad legal cage and he was on the outside of it. Tiffany seemed to be in even worse shape. All the fight had gone out of her. She was staring blankly at the empty space where the grandfather clock used to be, her mind seemingly unable to process the scale of their miscalculation. The $1 million prize they had been dreaming of, the solution to all their financial woes, had just evaporated into thin air. Finally, Jamal's shock curdled into a new, more desperate form of rage. He was a cornered animal, and he was going to lash out. He crumpled the cease and desist letter in his fist, the sound of the paper crackling unnaturally loud in the silent room. Fine, he spat the word laced with venom. He threw the crumpled paper onto the floor. Fine, you win. Keep the damn house. Let it rot around you for all I care. It was a blatant childish lie, the tantrum of a man who cared about nothing but the house. He took a step toward me, his eyes wild. But the money is a different story. That's not tied to the house. The will was clear, Henderson's will. It said the joint savings account passes to me. It's my inheritance. He wasn't trying to be clever anymore. This was raw, naked desperation. He was abandoning all pretense of caring for me and was simply making a frantic grab for the last remaining piece of the prize. "We're in trouble, Dad," he said, his voice dropping, attempting to shift from anger to a pathetic appeal for pity. "We have debts, serious debts. I'm your son. You can't just sit on that money while we drown. I need my inheritance. I need it now." Tiffany, seeing her cue, seemed to snap out of her trance. Tears, real or fabricated, I couldn't tell, welled up in her eyes. "Caleb, please," she said, her voice a trembling whisper. "We're your family. We made a mistake, we were wrong, but we're desperate. Please don't do this to us. Don't do this to your son." It was a disgusting, pathetic performance. They were like robbers who, after failing to crack the safe, were now begging the owner for a handout. I looked at my son's face, a desperate, pleading mess, and I felt a pang of the pity I had felt for him before. But it was quickly replaced by the cold, hard memory of Lena's voice. "They will try to make you feel guilty, Caleb. That is their last weapon. Do not let them use it." I shook my head slowly, my heart heavy with the lesson I was about to deliver. "Jamal," I began softly the will Mr. Henderson read. It was the truth. But it wasn't the whole truth. It was the simple version. It was the one your mother wanted you to hear. Before I could continue, Maya Jones stepped forward, taking control of the conversation, her presence a shield of legal authority. She addressed Jamal, her voice remaining perfectly calm, professional, and unemotional, which made the blow of her words 1,000 times more devastating. "Mr. Vance," she said, "the will you are referring to is indeed valid. However, a will only governs the assets held personally by the deceased at the time of their passing. As your mother's financial advisor and I can both attest, over the last year she undertook a significant and perfectly legal restructuring of her and your father's finances." Jamal stared at her, not comprehending. "Restructuring? What does that mean?" "It means," Maya continued, her voice cutting and precise, "that all significant liquid assets, including all savings accounts, all investment portfolios, and the specific joint account number 743B mentioned in Mr. Henderson's will, were legally transferred into the financial stewardship of the Vance Family Heritage Trust." A wave of nausea was visible on Jamal's face as he began to understand. Maya delivered the final clinical blow. "That joint account as of today contains a balance of $87.14, which is indeed your future inheritance. The rest of the funds, totaling over $760,000, are now, and have been for the better part of a year, assets of the trust. They are to be managed by the trustee, your father, according to the trust's strict bylaws, which I can assure you do not include bailing out family members from financial irresponsibility." It was done. The hope that had briefly flared in Jamal's eyes just moments before was extinguished completely and utterly. It wasn't just that they couldn't get the house. It was that there was no money. There was no inheritance. There was nothing. The entire fortune they had been banking on the foundation of their future plans and their arrogant behavior did not exist for them. Jamal stumbled back and sank onto the edge of the stairs, his head in his hands. Tiffany just stood there, her mouth hanging open, the fake tears on her cheeks already drying, leaving behind the stark, ugly truth of her greed. They had lost everything in the space of 5 minutes. The second wall of Lena's fortress had just been revealed, and it was just as high and just as impenetrable as the first. Jamal sat crumpled on the stairs, his head in his hands, a man whose entire world had been dismantled in the space of 10 minutes. Tiffany stood frozen in the middle of the empty living room, her mouth slightly agape, the fake tears on her cheeks having dried, leaving her face looking hollow and ghastly. The bravado, the anger, the pathetic pleading tears, it was all gone. All that was left was the stark, silent reality of their total and absolute defeat. They had lost. They had lost the house. They had lost the money. There was nothing left to fight for. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the empty kitchen. Maya Jones stood silently by the door, her job done, a respectful observer to the final painful act of this family tragedy. I looked at my son, my only child, so thoroughly broken, and my heart ached. There was no triumph in this, no sweet taste of victory. There was only a profound, soul-crushing sadness. It was Tiffany who finally broke the silence. Her voice was a hoarse, scratchy whisper, the sound of a person who had screamed herself hoarse on the inside. "So what then?" she asked, her vacant eyes finally focusing on me. "What happens to it all? The house? The money? You just..." "What?" "You just sit on it. You rattle around this empty house sitting on a pile of money until you die. And then what happens? It all goes to the government." Her question was so perfectly, so tragically her. Even in the face of total ruin, her mind could only operate in one way. Money was a thing to be had, to be spent, to be hoarded. The idea that wealth could have a purpose beyond personal enrichment was a concept so alien to her that she couldn't even fathom it. I shook my head slowly, a deep sense of pity washing over me again. Sit on it. No, Tiffany, that was never the point. Your mother didn't build a fortress to hide a treasure. She built it to protect a legacy. I took a step forward, my voice soft but clear, echoing slightly in the vast empty room. This house, you and Jamal, you see it as $1.2 million. A number. An asset to be liquidated. Your mother saw it as 50 years of laughter. She saw it as the place she brought her baby boy home from the hospital. She saw it as the kitchen where she taught him how to bake cookies. She saw it as the garden where she grew her roses. She saw it as a cornerstone of a community, a place of safety and warmth. And she wanted that to continue. She didn't want it torn down for soulless condos. She didn't want its value stripped and spent on country club memberships and luxury cars. I paused, letting the words sink in, a final indictment of their shallow materialistic world. So I continued, my voice growing stronger, filled with the pride and love I felt for my incredible wife. As per the primary directive of the Vance Family Heritage Trust, a directive that I, as trustee, am legally and morally bound to execute, this house is to be donated. Jamal's head snapped up. Tiffany's eyes widened in disbelief. Donated, she breathed. Yes, I said. It will be given free and clear to the Atlanta Youth Outreach Program. I let them absorb the shock before I delivered the final, most beautiful part of Lena's plan. The funds in the trust, the $760,000 you were so concerned about, will be used to maintain the property and to establish its new purpose. It will become the Lena Vance Center for Youth Arts and Trades. The workshop in the back, the one you never set foot in, Jamal, will be used to teach carpentry and other skills to kids who need a direction in life. The garden your mother loved will become a community garden, where local families can learn to grow their own food. The rooms where you grew up, son, the rooms filled with memories you were so eager to sell, will now be classrooms, music rooms, a library, a safe haven for children who don't have one of their own. I looked at my son. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions, shock, disbelief, and for the first time a flicker of what looked like shame. He was finally understanding the chasm between his own selfish desires and his mother's profound generosity. This reveal was not a financial blow. They already knew they couldn't get the house. This was a moral blow. It was a giant illuminated mirror held up to their greed, reflecting it back at them in its full, ugly monstrosity. They hadn't just tried to steal an asset. They had tried to destroy a legacy of kindness and community for their own selfish gain. There was nothing left for them to say. There was no argument to be made. They had been outmaneuvered not just legally, but morally. They had been playing a dirty game of checkers, and my Lena had been playing a beautiful, transcendent game of chess. I looked at my son, my heart aching for the boy he once was, and for the man he had failed to become. "That is your mother's legacy, son," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "Not a number in a bank account. A living, breathing part of the community she loved, a place that will help hundreds of children for years to come. That is what she was protecting. From you." The words settled in the empty room, a final, quiet testament to my wife's legacy. Jamal was still on the stairs, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the floor, at the space between his expensive shoes, as if the answer to his entire broken life could be found in the patterns of the wood grain. He was a ship that had been torpedoed, and he was now just drifting, the engines dead, the rudder gone. Tiffany, however, still had a spark of fight left in her. It wasn't the confident fire of before, but the spitting, desperate embers of a cornered animal. She looked around the empty room, at the bare walls, then at me, her face a twisted mask of contempt and disbelief. "So that's it," she sneered, her voice a harsh rasp. "You give away $1 million house. You lock up all the money. And for what?" "To teach us a lesson. What about you? Where are you going to go? The community center isn't going to let you live in the master bedroom. Are you going to be homeless? Is that your grand plan, Caleb? To be a homeless martyr living on the street while your son's life falls apart?" It was a pathetic final jab, an attempt to find some flaw in the plan, some way to reframe my victory as a self-inflicted wound. She couldn't comprehend a world where her values weren't universal. To her, a man without a valuable house and a big bank account was a man with nothing. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't even feel pity. I felt nothing. She was a stranger, a ghost in my house, and her words were meaningless. Homeless. I said the word sounding foreign and absurd. I reached into my trouser pocket and took out my old simple cell phone. It wasn't a fancy smartphone like theirs. It was a tool, not a status symbol. My hands, the hands of a carpenter, were steady as I swiped through a few screens. I found what I was looking for. I walked over to my son. He didn't look up as I approached. I crouched down slowly, my old knees protesting until I was at his eye level. "Jamal," I said softly. He finally lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like the little boy who had just fallen off his bike, scraped his knee, and realized for the first time that the world could hurt him. "Look," I said, and I turned the phone screen towards him. On the screen was a photograph. It wasn't a picture of a mansion. It wasn't a display of wealth. It was a picture of peace. A beautiful, modest cabin built of dark cedar was nestled amongst tall, whispering pine trees. A wide, screened-in porch with 2 simple rocking chairs overlooked the calm, gray-blue water of a lake. A small plume of smoke was rising from the stone chimney, a promise of warmth within. The picture was taken at dusk, and the fading light gave the entire scene a soft, gentle glow. Jamal stared at the image, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What? What is that?" "That sun," I said, my voice filled with a quiet reverence, "is the second wall of your mother's fortress, the one she built to keep me safe. That is my home." I stood up and looked from his confused face to Tiffany's. "Your mother was always 3 steps ahead," I explained. "She knew this day would come. She knew you wouldn't be satisfied with just the money. She knew you would come for the house, for the place where she felt safe. And she knew that after today it would no longer feel like home to me. It would be tainted by this memory. So she prepared a sanctuary." I described the lake house to them, the quiet lapping of the water, the sound of the wind in the pines. I told them about the workshop she had built for me, filled with brand new tools, a place where I could spend my days creating things again. I told them about the small fishing boat tied to the dock, about the hiking trails through the woods. I painted a picture of a life that was the complete antithesis of theirs. A life of peace, not pressure, of purpose, not profit, of quiet dignity, not loud desperation. "That was your mother's real final gift to me," I said. "Not the money and the trust, not even this house and its legacy. It was the gift of a future where I could heal, a future where I could be free." Tiffany finally found her voice, a sharp, accusatory whisper. "You used the money. You used the $700,000 to buy that—" I almost laughed. You still don't get it, do you? Your minds are so locked on that number. No, Tiffany. Your mother bought that house years ago with an inheritance from her own mother that you never knew about. She bought it through a company you'll never be able to trace. It's a ghost. It doesn't exist in your world of assets and liabilities. It's not a number on a balance sheet. It's a home. My home. The money in the trust is for the center and for my own simple living expenses. It's all accounted for. It's all protected. That was the final blow. The last desperate hope in their eyes died. Not only had they lost the prize they had been chasing, but they now had to confront the reality that there was a whole other world, a world of peace and contentment that was completely, utterly, and forever beyond their reach. They were looking at a picture of a life they couldn't have, a life built on values they didn't understand and could never possess. Maya Jones, who had remained a silent professional presence by the door, took a step forward. Her voice was quiet, but it signaled the end of the proceedings. "I believe our business here is concluded," she said. I took back my phone and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't look at my son again. I turned away from him and from Tiffany, and I walked to the bay window, looking out at the garden my Lena had so lovingly tended. The confrontation was over. The lesson had been delivered. I had won, but it was a quiet, somber victory. I was ready to leave the fortress behind. It was time to go to the sanctuary. I put the phone back in my pocket, the image of the peaceful lake fading from the screen. The truth of it, all of it, now hung in the air of the empty room, a heavy, suffocating blanket of consequences. Jamal and Tiffany were no longer angry. They were no longer scheming. They were hollowed out, two empty shells left on the shore after a storm. Jamal was still staring at the floor, but his gaze was vacant, unfocused. Tiffany's face was slack, her mouth slightly open, the last vestiges of her cunning and arrogance completely gone, replaced by a stark, blank despair. Maya Jones, ever the professional, saw that her part in this act was over. She gave me a slight, respectful nod. "Caleb," she said, her voice a quiet anchor in the tense silence, "I believe our business here is concluded. My car is waiting when you are ready." She turned and spoke to Jamal one last time, her tone crisp and final. "Mr. Vance, you will receive a formal invoice for the time and services of the movers you hired. I suggest you pay it promptly." And with that she walked out, leaving the three of us alone in the echoing emptiness. I looked at my son. The man who had stood here an hour ago so full of cold confidence and righteous greed was gone. In his place was a broken boy looking small and lost in his expensive suit. I felt a final deep pang of sorrow for him, for the relationship we once had, and for the man he could have been. But I knew that any words I could say now would be meaningless. The lesson had been delivered. The rest was up to him. I walked over to the mantelpiece, the one I had built, the one Tiffany had appraised with her greedy eyes. I ran my hand over the dark, smooth oak, feeling the familiar grain under my fingertips. I thought of all the Christmas stockings we had hung there, the family photos that had graced its surface, the warmth of the fires that had blazed beneath it. This house was a living thing filled with the breath of 50 years of our life. And now it was time to let it go, to let it breathe a new kind of life for a new generation. I turned and picked up the small duffel bag by the door. It felt impossibly light. A whole life, I thought, and this is all I am taking with me. But then I remembered Lena's words. We carry the love, the memories, with us. My real possessions weren't in a truck. They were safe inside me. I walked towards the door, towards my new life. As I reached the threshold, I passed the two movers who were still standing there, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. The bigger one, the one with the beard, stepped into my path. "Hey, hold on a minute, old man," he said, his voice a low grumble. "What about us? We drove our truck all the way out here. We're on the clock. Who's paying for this?" I stopped. I didn't look at him. I looked past him through the open doorway to where my son was now slowly getting to his feet, his face ashen. I met his hollow eyes one last time. "You'll have to ask the man who hired you," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of finality. I was handing him the first bill for his new life, a life built on the consequences of his own actions. I stepped past the mover and out onto the porch. The bright Georgia sun hit my face and I had to squint for a moment. The air felt fresh, clean. It felt like freedom. I did not look back. I walked down the familiar stone steps my own hands had laid, and I did not look back. I walked along the cracked sidewalk past the rose bushes Lena had planted, and I did not look back. A simple dark blue sedan was parked at the curb. Maya Jones was in the driver's seat. She gave me a small supportive smile as I opened the passenger door and got in. The seat was comfortable. The car was quiet. As she pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one final glance, not in the rearview mirror, but through the side window. I saw the scene I was leaving behind, a tableau of ruin. My son and my daughter-in-law standing on the lawn of a house that was no longer theirs, looking small and lost. The two movers were now confronting Jamal, their body language angry and demanding. The big empty moving truck was parked at the curb, a monument to their failed coup. It was a sad, pathetic sight. But as Maya turned the corner and the house disappeared from view, I did not feel sadness. I did not feel anger. I did not even feel triumph. I felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The curtain had fallen on my old life. The fortress Lena had built had served its purpose. It had protected her legacy. And now I was free. I turned my face forward, looking down the open road towards the sanctuary that was waiting for me. And for the first time since Lena had closed her eyes, I felt the unmistakable, gentle stirring of a new beginning. The car ride back to their sprawling, ostentatiously modern house in the suburbs was silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with unspoken accusations and the bitter taste of ruin. The sleek silver Lexus, which had felt like a chariot of triumph on the way to my house, now felt like a hearse carrying the corpse of their ambitions. Jamal drove his hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his eyes fixed on the road, seeing nothing. Tiffany sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her face a frozen mask of disbelief. The triumphant, gloating couple who had left my house an hour before had been replaced by two strangers trapped together in a shared catastrophe. They didn't speak as they entered their house, a place with soaring ceilings, vast white walls, and minimalist furniture that looked impressive but offered no comfort. The house was a reflection of their lives, a beautiful, expensive facade built on a foundation of crushing debt. For the past few months, they had seen my home as the solution, the final massive infusion of capital that would solidify their precarious lifestyle and launch them into the next tier of social status. Now that solution was gone, and all that was left were the problems. Jamal immediately went to the wet bar and poured himself a large glass of whiskey, his movements stiff and robotic. Tiffany stood in the middle of the cavernous living room, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. The first domino fell the next morning. Jamal's phone, which had been silent on the glass coffee table, began to buzz. The caller ID read Amex Platinum Services. He ignored it. It buzzed again a minute later. He ignored it again. "Aren't you going to get that?" Tiffany asked, her voice flat, devoid of its usual melodic charm. "It's nothing," Jamal muttered, staring into his coffee cup. "Just a reminder." A few hours later, the phone rang again. This time the caller ID was a private number. Jamal let it go to voicemail. The phone immediately rang again, the same private number. With a sigh of frustration, he answered it. "Yeah," he said, his voice clipped. Even from across the room, Tiffany could hear the gruff, angry voice on the other end. "Don't you yeah me, Jamal. Where's my money? You said the deal was closing this week. You said the wire was coming." Jamal stood up and walked towards the large glass windows, turning his back to Tiffany, trying to find a privacy that no longer existed. "There's been a slight delay, Mr. Petrov," he said, his voice a poor imitation of his usual smooth, confident tone. "Just some last-minute estate complications. You know how it is with these things." The voice on the other end barked a laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't know about complications, son. What I know is that you owe me $50,000 with interest, and you promised me it would be paid by Friday. Friday is tomorrow. Is the money coming, or do I need to come see you?" No, that won't be necessary," Jamal said quickly, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "The money is coming. I guarantee it. Just a few more days." He hung up the phone, his hand trembling. He had been borrowing money, making promises against a future that he now knew would never arrive. Petrov Tiffany asked, her voice a cold whisper. "You borrowed from him? Are you insane, Jamal?" Before he could answer her own phone, a brand-new rose-gold iPhone began to chime. The screen lit up with the logo of the luxury car brand she drove. She answered, her voice a forced, cheerful lilt. "Hello?" Her face fell as she listened. Yes, I understand. No, there must be a mistake. A repossession order. But the payment is only 2 weeks late." She listened for another moment, her face turning pale. "I see. Yes, I understand." She ended the call and looked at Jamal, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pure contempt. "They're going to take my car, Jamal. They're sending someone to repossess my car. You promised me you handled the payment." "I was going to after the house deal closed," he stammered. After the house deal closed, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the large, empty room. "That seems to be your answer for everything, doesn't it? Everything was riding on taking that money from your father." As if summoned by the escalating crisis, Jamal's phone rang again. This time the caller ID read Richard Sterling, Sterling Realty. His boss, the senior partner at his brokerage, a man you did not keep waiting. With a look of pure dread, Jamal answered the call, forcing a professional tone. "Richard, good morning. What can I do for you?" He listened, and every last bit of color drained from his face. He sank onto the edge of a stark white sofa, the phone still pressed to his ear. "Richard, I can explain. It was a misunderstanding. No, it was a solid deal. He's my father. There were family complications. A complaint. He filed a formal complaint with the board. Richard, please, my license." Yes, I understand." He hung up the phone and stared into space, his eyes completely vacant. He was a man who had just received a fatal diagnosis. What Tiffany demanded, her voice shaking. What was that? Jamal looked at her, his expression utterly broken. "That was Richard," he said, his voice a hollow shell. "The developer I had the cash offer from. He's a major client of the firm. He was furious about the deal falling through. He was even more furious when he found out the property was in an irrevocable trust and never legally for sale. He thinks I tried to use him to commit fraud. He filed a formal complaint with the state real estate board. Richard has suspended my license pending an investigation. He had done it. In his desperate, greedy rush to secure a future he felt he was owed, he had systematically destroyed his present. The dominoes were falling one after another, a cascade of ruin that had been set in motion by his own hand. He was in debt to dangerous people. His wife's car was about to be taken, and his career, the very foundation of his fragile, arrogant identity, was in flames. He sat there in his beautiful, expensive house that now felt like a tomb, the walls closing in on him, and he finally truly understood. He had not just been outsmarted, he had been annihilated. He sat there in his beautiful, expensive house that now felt like a tomb, the walls closing in on him, and he finally truly understood. He had not just been outsmarted, he had been annihilated. For a long time he didn't move. He just stared at the blank television screen across the room, seeing nothing but the reflection of a broken man. The silence in the house was absolute, a dead, heavy quiet that was a universe away from the peaceful silence of my home. This was the silence of a vacuum, the silence of ruin. Tiffany, who had been standing frozen by the window, was the first to move. She walked slowly, deliberately to the wet bar and poured herself a glass of water, her movements stiff and controlled. She took a long, slow sip. The panic that had consumed her had been replaced by something far more dangerous, a cold, clear, calculating rage. She placed the glass down on the marble countertop with a soft click and turned to face her husband. "So, this is it," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, any emotion. It was as flat and as sharp as a shard of glass. "This is your brilliant plan. Homeless father, repossessed car, and a suspended license. Congratulations, Jamal. You've managed to destroy our entire lives in the space of a week. Quite an accomplishment." Jamal didn't look at her. He just kept staring at the blank screen. "Don't, Tiff," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Not now." "Oh no, we are absolutely doing this now," she said, her voice rising, gaining a venomous edge. She walked over and stood in front of him, blocking his view of nothing. "I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you explain to me how you, the big-shot real estate closer, the man who was so much smarter than his simple old carpenter father, managed to get played so completely." He finally looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "It was my mother," he whispered. "It was all her. She had this whole thing planned." Tiffany let out a harsh, ugly laugh. "Your mother. Your dead mother. Don't you dare hide behind her. She didn't force you to be a fool. I thought you were a shark, Jamal. I thought you were a winner. Turns out you're just a little boy who couldn't even outsmart his own grieving father, a grieving old man, and you let him lead you around by the nose like a child." "That's not what happened," he yelled finally, finding his voice, a voice raw with humiliation and rage. He was acting, the whole time, the confused old man, the weak heart, It was all an act, a performance. And you fell for it, she screamed. You with all your talk about reading people and closing deals, you fell for the oldest trick in the book. You were so sure of yourself. He's old Tiff. He's not all there. Who's not all there now, Jamal? Who's the one who just lost everything because he was too arrogant and too stupid to see what was right in front of his face? That was the spark. Jamal shot up from the sofa, his face contorted with a fury that matched her own. My plan. He roared, his voice cracking. My plan. This was our plan. Don't you stand there and pretend you were some innocent bystander. You were the one pushing me every single step of the way. You were the one taking pictures of the furniture on your damn phone before my mother was even cold in the ground. You were the one whispering about appraisals and bridge loans and how much the chandelier was worth. He was in her face now, his voice a torrent of blame and resentment. This was never about caring for my dad. This was about your country club membership. This was about your next trip to Aspen. This was about that ridiculous car that's about to be towed out of our driveway. Don't you dare stand there on your high horse and pretend this was all me. I was supporting my husband, she shrieked back. I was supporting the life you promised me, the life you said we were going to have once we finally got what we were owed. Owed? He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. We weren't owed anything. That was the lesson. That's what my mother was trying to teach me, and I was too stupid and too blinded by you and all this stuff. He gestured wildly around the room at the expensive art on the walls, at the minimalist Italian sofa. This was your dream, Tiffany, not mine. I was fine before I met you. I was happy. You were a mid-level agent living in a 2-bedroom condo. She spat. I gave you ambition. I gave you a life. You gave me debt, he yelled. You gave me sleepless nights. You turned me into a man who would try to steal from his own father. My mother saw you for what you were from the very beginning. A predator in pearls. She said it. And I was too weak and too blinded by you to listen to her. The words hung in the air, ugly and unforgivable. Tiffany's face went pale, then red. With a scream of pure rage, she grabbed a heavy, abstract crystal sculpture from a nearby pedestal and hurled it onto the floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. The sound of the crash seemed to break the fever of their rage. They stood there breathing heavily on opposite sides of the room, the glittering fragments of the broken sculpture lying between them like a field of jagged diamonds. The fight was over. There was nothing left to say. All the resentments, all the blame, all the ugly truths of their marriage, which had been built on the shared dream of a future inheritance, were now laid bare. And with that inheritance gone, there was nothing left to hold them together. They looked at each other not as husband and wife, but as two strangers who had just survived a shipwreck, now stranded on a deserted island, realizing with dawning horror that they were enemies. The beautiful house, their symbol of success, was now just a luxurious prison. And the foundation of their marriage, built on nothing but greed, had just crumbled into dust. The shattered pieces of the crystal sculpture lay on the floor between them for 2 days, a glittering minefield of their shared failure. Neither Jamal nor Tiffany made a move to clean it up. It was a monument to their rage, a symbol of their broken marriage, and they seemed to want the reminder. They moved around the house like ghosts, occupying the same space but existing in different worlds. The silence punctuated only by the incessant buzzing demands of Jamal's phone. He had stopped answering it. There was nothing left to say to the angry voices on the other end. The thing that finally forced them to act arrived on the 3rd day. It was an email sent not to Jamal but to Tiffany. The sender was Maya Jones. The subject line was cold and professional, final disposition of personal effects at 125 Magnolia Drive. The email was short and devoid of any emotion. It stated that as per the bylaws of the Vance Family Heritage Trust, all remaining personal effects on the property were scheduled to be disposed of by a junk removal service at 9:00 a.m. on Friday. However, as a final courtesy, Mr. Caleb Vance had designated certain items to be set aside for Mr. Jamal Vance should he wish to claim his inheritance. The items would be available for pickup from the garage for the next 48 hours. After that, they would be considered abandoned. Inheritance. Tiffany read the word aloud, her voice a dry, cynical croak. She looked at Jamal, who was slumped on the white Italian sofa, staring at the shattered sculpture. He's dangling something in front of us. What do you think it is? A flicker of some desperate, foolish hope sparked in Jamal's eyes. I don't know, he whispered. Maybe he felt bad. Maybe he left something for us. The coin collection. My mother's jewelry. He can't have moved everything. The thought that there might be some small salvageable prize from the wreckage was enough to get them moving. The silent, resentful car ride back to my old house was a repeat of the one they'd taken after the first confrontation, but this time it was tinged with a desperate, pathetic hope instead of smug confidence. When they pulled up to the curb, the first blow hit them. A simple, professionally made sign had been staked into the lawn near the front walk. It read, "Future home of the Lena Vance Center for Youth Arts and Trades, opening fall 2026. The house was no longer just a house. It was already a monument to the legacy they had tried to destroy. Jamal fumbled with the old key, his hands shaking slightly. When the door swung open, the emptiness of the house seemed even more profound than before. My solitary armchair was gone. The lamp was gone. The only thing in the entire living room was the crumpled cease and desist letter Jamal had thrown on the floor, a sad white remnant of his failed rebellion. Following the email's instructions, they walked through the hollow echoing house to the door that led to the garage. It was a space they had rarely entered, a place that smelled of sawdust oil and my fatherly projects. It was my space. Jamal hesitated for a moment, his hand on the doorknob. "What if it's a trick?" he whispered to Tiffany. "What more can he possibly do to us, Jamal?" she said, her voice weary. "Just open the door." He opened it. The garage was dark and musty. He fumbled for the light switch, a single bare bulb flickering to life, casting long, distorted shadows. In the center of the garage, where my old workbench used to be, was a large, misshapen pile covered by a dusty canvas tarp. For a moment, their hearts beat faster. A pile. It was something. It was tangible. Jamal walked forward slowly, his footsteps hesitant. He reached for the corner of the tarp, his desperation warring with his dread. He took a deep breath and pulled it back. And there it was. Their inheritance. It was a mountain of junk. Not valuable antiques, but the true detritus of a long life lived. Stacks of old, yellowed National Geographic magazines from the 70s, their spines broken. 3 boxes of chipped and mismatched coffee mugs. A tangle of old fishing rods with snarled lines. My old, worn-out gardening boots caked with 50 years of Georgia clay. A rusty, broken lawnmower. A pyramid of half-empty paint cans. A collection of threadbare blankets that the dog used to sleep on. Piles of old vinyl records with torn sleeves, not the rare jazz collectibles, but old scratched Christmas albums and forgotten pop hits. It was everything that was too worn out to be useful, but had been kept for a sentimental value that was now meaningless. It was the physical manifestation of worthless. Tiffany just stared, her mouth agape. Jamal slowly circled the pile, his eyes scanning the worthless objects, his face a mask of utter disbelief. This couldn't be it. It had to be a joke. Then he saw it. Perched on the very top of the junk pile was a small, shoebox-sized wooden box. It was a simple, unadorned pine box I had made years ago. With trembling hands, he reached up and took it down. This had to be it. The jewelry, the coins, the last piece of the prize. He opened the lid. Inside there was no velvet lining. There was no treasure. There was only a single folded piece of notepaper. He picked it up. It was a handwritten note from me. It didn't say much. It wasn't angry. It wasn't gloating. It was simple, and in its simplicity, it was the most devastating blow of all. "Jamal," it read, "you were always so concerned with the value of things. I've left you all the things that have no price. I hope you find what they're worth." "Dad." Jamal stared at the note, the words blurring in his eyes. He dropped the box, his hands suddenly weak. He sank to his knees on the dusty concrete floor, the note still clutched in his fist. He had not only lost $1 million house, he had inherited his father's trash. Tiffany started to laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a hysterical, broken, terrifying sound that bounced off the garage walls. "This is it," she shrieked, tears of manic laughter streaming down her face. "This is our inheritance. A pile of garbage. He left us his garbage." She laughed and laughed until the laughter turned into ragged, ugly sobs. Jamal didn't make a sound. He just knelt there in the middle of the dusty garage, surrounded by the worthless physical symbols of his own greed and failure, a king reigning over his kingdom of trash. The drive to the lake house with Maya had been quiet. I had watched the familiar streets of Atlanta give way to the sprawling suburbs, and then to the green rolling hills of North Georgia. Each mile put more distance between me and the wreckage of my old life. I didn't feel sad, I didn't feel angry, I just felt empty, a blank slate. When we finally pulled down the long gravel driveway and the cabin came into view nestled in the pines, I felt a flicker of something, a tiny spark in the cold darkness of my grief. It was the flicker of peace. The first few days were a blur. I spent my time walking by the lake, sitting on the screened-in porch, watching the sun set over the water and exploring the small cabin that was now my home. It was a space filled with the ghost of Lena's love. She had stocked the pantry with my favorite foods. She had left a collection of my favorite books on the nightstand. There was even a new comfortable armchair waiting for me by the fireplace, almost identical to my old one. She had thought of everything. But there was one door I hadn't opened yet, the door to the small building just off the main cabin. The workshop. I had been avoiding it, I think. I was afraid of what I would feel when I went in there. That part of my life, the life of Caleb the carpenter, felt like it belonged to a different man, a man from a different lifetime, a man who had a wife to share his creations with. On the third morning, I woke before dawn. I made myself a cup of strong black coffee and stood on the porch watching the mist rise off the lake like a slow waking breath. The air was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth, and I knew it was time. I walked across the damp grass to the workshop. The key, a simple sturdy brass key, was already in the lock, another small detail Lena had arranged. I turned it. The lock clicked open with a satisfying solid sound. I pushed the door open, and the scent that hit me almost brought me to my knees. It was the smell of my life. It was the rich, clean, sharp scent of freshly cut wood, cedar, oak, and pine. It was the faint, clean smell of machine oil. It was the smell of potential, the smell of creation. The morning light was just beginning to filter in through a large picture window that overlooked the lake. It illuminated a space that was nothing short of a sanctuary. It was perfect. The walls were lined with brand new tools, neatly organized on pegboards, their steel gleaming. A heavy-duty table saw stood in the center of the room like an altar. A drill press was in the corner. A beautiful, powerful lathe was bolted to a workbench that ran the length of the back wall. It was the workshop I had dreamed of my entire life, a space I had never allowed myself to have, always putting our family's other needs first. And Lena, my brilliant, loving Lena, had given it to me as her final gift. I walked into the room, running my hand over the cool, smooth steel of the table saw. This was more than just a room with tools. This was Lena's final message to me. She hadn't just secured my finances. She hadn't just protected me from betrayal. She had secured my soul. She knew that a man who has worked with his hands his whole life cannot find peace in idleness. She knew I needed a place to build, to create, to feel the familiar weight of a hammer in my hand and the satisfaction of a perfect, seamless joint. She knew I needed to be myself again. Tears I didn't know I still had began to stream down my face. They weren't tears of grief, not this time. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of a love so profound it had reached across the veil of death itself to care for me. I could feel her presence in that room so strongly, in the thoughtful placement of each tool, in the sturdy construction of the workbench, in the magnificent view of the lake from the window. Hanging on a hook by the door was a simple canvas work apron, stiff and new. I took it down and tied it around my waist. The simple act felt like a ceremony, like putting on the vestments of my old life, my real life. My eyes scanned the neat stacks of lumber piled against one wall. Lena must have had it delivered. Beautiful, clear-grained planks of oak, fragrant cedar boards, and smooth, pale pine. I selected a piece of cedar, its color a rich reddish-brown, its scent filling the air as I carried it to the table saw. I placed the wood on the saw, my hands feeling the familiar texture of the grain. My hands, which had trembled with age and sorrow for the past few months, were now steady. I adjusted the fence, my movements sure, and practiced an old muscle memory awakening. I took a deep breath and I turned on the saw. The machine roared to life, a powerful, deafening sound that shattered the quiet morning, but to me it was the most beautiful music in the world. It was the sound of my life starting again. It was the sound of purpose. I guided the cedar plank into the spinning blade. The saw bit into the wood, sending a spray of fragrant sawdust into the air. The cut was clean, perfect. I watched the blade work, my mind completely focused, completely present in the moment for the first time in a long, long time. I was not a grieving widower. I was not a victim. I was not a fighter who had just won a bitter war. I was simply Caleb. a carpenter, and I was home. I spent the rest of the day in that workshop, the setting sun casting long golden shafts of light through the window, illuminating the dancing sawdust. I wasn't building anything in particular. I was just cutting, shaping, and sanding, reacquainting myself with the tools and the wood and with myself. And with each clean cut, with each smooth pass of the sandpaper, I could feel a piece of my broken heart beginning to mend. I spent the next 2 months in a state of quiet grace. The cabin on Lake Lanier, Lena's final, most thoughtful gift, became my sanctuary. The rhythm of my days was simple, dictated by the sun and my own inclinations. I would wake early, make coffee, and sit on the screened-in porch, watching the mist burn off the still glassy surface of the lake. The only sounds were the lapping of the water against the shore and the cry of a distant loon. After breakfast, I would go to my workshop. The scent of cedar and sawdust filled my lungs, a scent I hadn't realized I had missed so dearly. I worked with my hands again, not out of necessity, but for the sheer joy of it. The feel of a sharp plane gliding over a piece of oak, the satisfaction of a perfectly cut dovetail joint. These simple things began to stitch the frayed edges of my soul back together. I built a small bookshelf for Lena's poetry books. I built 2 new sturdy rocking chairs for the porch. I was building a new life, one piece of wood at a time. The grief for Lena was still there, a constant gentle ache in my heart, but it was no longer a crushing weight. It was a companion now, a soft, sad melody playing in the background of my newfound peace. I had not spoken to Jamal since the day I left the house in Atlanta. I didn't know what had become of him and Tiffany, and a part of me didn't want to know. Maya had handled the final legalities of the house donation, and the first fundraiser for the Lena Vance Center was scheduled for the fall. I had closed that chapter of my life. Then one evening, as I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the trees, painting the lake in hues of orange and purple, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with an Atlanta area code. My first instinct was to ignore it. I didn't want anything to disturb the quiet peace I had so carefully constructed. But some impulse, some lingering thread of fatherly instinct made me answer. "Hello," I said. There was silence on the other end, just the faint sound of ragged breathing. "Hello," I repeated a little more firmly. "Dad." The voice was so broken, so stripped of its usual confidence that I almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't the voice of the arrogant real estate agent who had tried to sell my home. It wasn't the voice of the angry cornered man who had yelled at me in my living room. It was the voice of a little boy, a voice I hadn't heard in 30 years. Jamal. There was a long pause filled with a choked wet sound that I realized was a sob. "Yeah, Dad," he finally managed to say. "It's me." I didn't say anything. I just sat there in my rocking chair listening to my son weep on the other end of the line. I didn't know what to say. There were no words for the chasm that lay between us. So I did the only thing I could do. I listened. I'm so sorry, Dad," he finally choked out the words, tumbling out in a rush of shame and regret. "I'm so sorry." I remained silent. An apology was a start, but it was just a word. I needed to know if he understood what he was apologizing for. As if he'd heard my thoughts, he began to talk. He told me everything. He told me about his boss suspending his license, about the real estate board investigation that had ended his career. He told me about the angry calls from Mr. Petrov and how he had to sell his own car to pay back a fraction of the debt. He told me that Tiffany's car had been repossessed. And then he told me that Tiffany had left him. "She's gone, Dad," he said, his voice a hollow whisper. "She packed her bags last month. She said she'd married a winner, not a failure who had been outsmarted by his own father. She said I was pathetic." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. She was right. He took a shaky breath. "After she left, I had to go back to the house, to the garage, to get rid of the inheritance." He said the word with a self-loathing that was palpable. "I hired a junk removal truck, and I started going through it. The old magazines, the broken tools. It was all just trash. Just like she said." He paused and his voice changed, losing its edge of self-pity and gaining a note of genuine discovery. "And then I found my old baseball glove, the one you bought me when I made the Little League team. It was in one of the boxes. And I found the birdhouse we built together, the one that was so crooked. And I just I sat there, Dad. On the dusty floor of that garage for hours, I just sat there holding that glove, looking at that birdhouse. And I finally understood. I finally understood what you and Mom were trying to tell me. I was so busy trying to cash in on your life, I completely missed what was actually valuable. The confession was raw, painful, and deeply, achingly sincere. He had finally learned the lesson. Lena's lesson. I finally found my voice. It was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You broke my heart, son," I said softly. "You broke your mother's heart. She knew this was coming. It was the great sadness of her final year watching the man you had become." "I know," he whispered. "God, I know. I would give anything to go back and tell her I'm sorry. You can't. I said the truth of it hanging between us, hard and final. All you can do now is live a life that would have made her proud." How he asked, his voice desperate. "I have nothing, Dad. I've lost everything. My job, my house, Tiffany, everything." This was the moment. The moment where the old me, the pre-Fortress Caleb, would have offered him money, a place to stay, a solution. But Lena had taught me one final hard lesson. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is to let his son face the consequences. "No, son, you haven't lost everything." I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You've just lost all the things that don't matter. You still have yourself. You have to start over. I'm a carpenter, Jamal. I know that you can't build a strong house on a rotten foundation. You have to tear it all down to the dirt and start over. It's hard, slow work, but it's the only way it will last." I don't know how, he said, his voice small. "You learn," I said. "You get a job, a real job, one where you work with your hands instead of your mouth. You pay your debts. You learn to live with less. You learn to be a man of integrity, a man of his word. You become a man your mother would have been proud of." A long silence stretched between us. The sun had completely set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the deep purple sky over the lake. "Dad," he said finally, his voice fragile, will I ever see you again?" "The path to forgiveness is a long one, son," I told him, "and it starts with you forgiving yourself. When you've started to build that new foundation, when you've started to become that man, then you can come and find me." We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. I sat there on the porch in the gathering dark, the phone in my hand, looking out at the peaceful, starlit water. The wound between my son and me was not healed. But the poison of greed and lies had finally been drawn out, and for the first time I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope that one day the carpenter's son might learn how to build again. The phone call ended, and I sat there on the porch in the gathering dark, the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. The screen of my phone went black, but the echo of my son's broken voice remained. I had expected to feel a sense of finality, of closure, maybe even a grim sense of satisfaction. I felt none of those things. Instead, my heart was filled with a profound and heavy sorrow. I thought of my son alone in a city that had chewed him up and spit him out, his life in ruins, and I asked the silent, starlit sky the question that had been hovering in the back of my mind for months. Was this what you wanted, Lena? Was this the victory you envisioned, to see him so completely and utterly broken? For a moment I let the thought take hold. Revenge. It was a simple, ugly, and deeply human explanation for everything that had happened. Lena, my wise and loving wife, using her final months to orchestrate a devastating posthumous revenge on the son who had disappointed her and the daughter-in-law who had tried to exploit her. It was a compelling story. It made a certain kind of brutal sense. She had taken everything from them, the house, the money, their status, their marriage. It was a total annihilation, a scorched earth campaign against their greed. But as I sat there rocking slowly in the chair I had built with my own hands, I knew in my soul that it wasn't true. Lena was not a vengeful woman. She was a builder, a nurturer, an accountant who believed in balanced ledgers and elegant solutions. Revenge was too messy, too chaotic. It was an act of passion, not of intellect. And Lena's plan, above all else, was intelligent. I began to deconstruct it in my mind, not as a series of attacks, but as a series of lessons. The house. She hadn't just locked it away in a trust to keep it from them. She had given it a new purpose. The Lena Vance Center for Youth Arts and Trades. It wasn't an act of denial, it was an act of affirmation. She was showing Jamal what a home's true value was, not as an asset to be liquidated, but as a legacy to be shared, a place to build community, to foster hope. It was a direct public contrast to his selfish private ambitions. It was a lesson in generosity. The money. She hadn't just hidden it to punish him. She had removed the poison that was corrupting his soul. As long as the promise of that massive inheritance existed, Jamal would never have to stand on his own 2 feet. He would always be waiting, scheming, taking shortcuts. By removing the safety net, she had removed his excuses. She had forced him for the first time in his adult life to face the world without the promise of unearned wealth. It was a terrifying gift, but a gift nonetheless. It was a lesson in self-reliance and the inheritance, that final, cruelest-seeming gesture, the pile of junk in the garage. For weeks I had thought of that as a final, deserved insult. But now, thinking of Jamal's broken voice on the phone, his words about finding his old baseball glove, the crooked birdhouse, I saw it differently. It wasn't a punishment. It was a final, desperate plea. It was Lena, through me, telling him to look past the price tags and the appraisals and to find the things that were truly valuable. The memories of a father and son covered in sawdust, building something together. The echo of a childhood spent in a home filled with love, not just assets. It was a lesson in value. I leaned my head back and looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky. I finally understood. Lena's plan was not a fortress designed for war. It was a crucible, a carefully constructed vessel designed to withstand immense heat and pressure. She had placed our son inside it, not to destroy him, but to burn away the impurities, the greed, the arrogance, the weakness, and to see what, if anything, of the good man she knew was still inside remained. It was an act of terrible, painful, and profound love. It was the love of a mother who was willing to allow her son to be destroyed in the desperate hope that he might be reborn from the ashes. She had known that this was the only way. A lecture would not have worked. Cutting him off would have only made him more resentful. He had to choose his own path, walk it to its disastrous conclusion, and stand alone in the wreckage. The justice Lena had sought was not retribution. It was clarity. The clarity that only comes from losing everything you thought you wanted and being forced to confront what you truly need. I didn't know if Jamal would ever find his way back. I didn't know if he would ever truly rebuild his life. But I knew that for the first time, he had a chance. A real chance. And that chance had been given to him by the mother he had so thoroughly betrayed. That was Lena's justice. It wasn't the justice of a judge, but the justice of a parent, a painful, heartbreaking lesson rooted in a love that was fierce enough to break her own son's heart in the hope of one day making it whole again. A month has passed since the phone call. A month of quiet days and peaceful nights. The autumn leaves have begun to turn, painting the shoreline of the lake in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. I spend my days in the workshop, the scent of cedar, a constant comfort, the hum of the lathe, a gentle companion. The grief for Lena is a part of me now, a soft, quiet ache that reminds me of the depth of our love, not just the pain of its absence. I have found the peace she wanted for me. It is a profound, unshakable peace born not of ignorance, but of understanding. This morning I drove into the small town nearby and bought this journal. It's a simple leather-bound book with thick, creamy pages. I also bought a good pen, one that feels solid and balanced in my hand. I've decided to write this all down. Not for anyone else, really, but for me. I need to put the pieces of the story together in one place to look at the whole, ugly, beautiful, heartbreaking puzzle and understand its final shape. And perhaps it's a final way of having a conversation with my wife, a final tribute to the incredible, terrible, beautiful plan she set in motion. So, I begin. The first thing I find myself thinking about, the thing that sits at the very heart of this whole affair, is the nature of deception. For the better part of a year, my life was a web of lies, theirs and my own. I think about their deception first, about Jamal and Tiffany. I've had a lot of time to reflect on it here in the quiet. Their lies were born of a deep and desperate emptiness. They were chasing a version of happiness they had seen on television and in magazines, a life measured in square footage and luxury brand names. They were so blinded by this hollow dream that they began to see people, even the people who loved them most, as either stepping stones or obstacles. I was an obstacle. My life, my home, my very existence was a barrier between them and the money they believed would solve all their problems. And so they began to lie. They lied to me with their fake smiles and their feigned concern. But the more I think about it, the more I realize the biggest lies they told were to themselves. They told themselves they were being responsible. They told themselves they were doing what was best for me. They told themselves they were owed this inheritance, that it was their right. They built a fortress of self-serving justifications around their greed, a fortress so thick that it blinded them to their own cruelty. They were not evil people, not in the way you read about in stories. They were just weak, hollow people. And greed, like water, will always find its way into the hollow places. Then there was my deception. This is the harder part to write about. I had to lie to my own son. I had to pretend to be weak, confused, and frail. I had to watch him day after day and feign ignorance as he plotted to take everything from me. There is a part of me that will always carry the shame of that. A father should not have to hide his strength from his son. But as I write this, I understand what Lena knew all along. My deception was not the same as theirs. Theirs was a lie designed to take something, to steal, to consume. Mine was a lie designed to protect. It was a shield. It was the performance of a lifetime, an act of terrible, necessary love. I was a carpenter playing the part of a sheep so that the wolves would reveal themselves. I had to let them believe I was weak so I could discover if there was any strength, any goodness left in my son. It was a painful, ugly thing to do. But I know now it was the only way. To expose a great lie, sometimes you must create one of your own. You must let the rot in the foundation reveal itself completely before you can begin to think about rebuilding. My deception was a controlled demolition, designed to bring down the false structure of our family in the desperate hope that something true might one day be built in its place. And finally there was Lena's deception, the greatest, most profound deception of all, her secret accounts, her invisible house, her brilliant multi-layered plan. It was a masterpiece of strategy, a fortress of legal and financial genius. But as I sit here looking out at the peaceful water of the lake she gave me, I understand that it was not at its heart a plan of attack. It was a plan of love. It was a brutal, heartbreaking, and fiercely loving act. She did not set out to destroy our son. She set out to save him. She knew that the only way to save him from the poison of his own greed was to let him drink it down to the last bitter drop. She had to let him lose everything to give him a chance to find himself. That is the hardest lesson of all, the one I am only just beginning to understand. The truth, when it is finally revealed after a long season of lies, is both a destructive and a cleansing fire. It has burned my family to the ground. It has burned away the idealized image of the son I thought I had. It has burned away the comfortable, happy future I once envisioned for him. All of that is gone, turned to ash. But in the ashes, something new has a chance to grow. Something honest. Something real. The fire has burned away the lies, and all that is left is the painful quiet and undeniable truth. I've let a few weeks pass since I last wrote in this journal. Winter has come to the lake. The vibrant colors of autumn have faded, replaced by the stark, quiet beauty of bare trees and a sky the color of steel. A thin layer of ice has begun to form at the edges of the water, and the air is so cold and clear it feels like a cleansing breath every time I step outside. I've spent most of my days in the workshop, the warmth from the small wood stove and the scent of sawdust keeping the winter chill at bay. I finished the bookshelves for Lena's poetry collection. They stand by the fireplace now, filled with the words she loved. It feels right. I suppose this will be my final entry about this chapter of my life. The act of writing it all down, of putting the events in order, has brought a clarity I didn't know I was seeking. It has been a difficult thing to revisit, but a necessary one. Now, as I prepare to close this book, I find myself thinking about the future, about the true meaning of the word legacy, and about the quiet, solid peace I have found here. For so long, I thought I understood what a legacy was. It was something you built, something you saved, something you passed down. A house, a savings account, a collection of tools. It was a physical inheritance, a tangible measure of a life's work. That was the definition Jamal and Tiffany operated under. To them, a legacy was a prize to be claimed, a number in a bank account that would unlock the life they wanted. They saw it as a passive thing, a treasure waiting at the end of a map. Their tragedy is that they were willing to destroy the mapmaker to get to a treasure that was never really there. Lena knew better. She understood that a true legacy is not something you leave to people. It's something you leave in people. It is active, not passive. It is a living, breathing thing. I received a letter last week from the director of the Atlanta Youth Outreach Program. She sent me a photograph. In the photo, a group of teenagers were standing on the lawn of my old house, the new sign for the Lena Vance Center gleaming behind them. They were holding saws and hammers, their faces a mixture of concentration and pride. They were building something, planter boxes for the new community garden that will be planted in the spring in the very spot where Lena grew her roses. That photograph. That is Lena's legacy. It is the sound of a hammer hitting a nail in the hands of a young woman who is discovering her own strength. It is the future scent of tomatoes growing in a garden tended by neighborhood families. It is the echo of music that will one day be played in the rooms where our son grew up. Her legacy is not a silent, decaying asset. It is a loud, joyful, and ongoing act of creation. And what of the legacy she left for our son? It was the cruelest and perhaps the kindest inheritance of all. She left him nothing so that he might have a chance to build something for himself. She took away his safety net so he would be forced to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. The pile of junk in the garage wasn't a final insult. It was a final lesson. It was a collection of objects whose only value was memory and sentiment, the very things he had been willing to discard. I do not know if he has learned that lesson. I do not know if he ever will. The future I see for him is a foggy, uncertain path. I hope with the quiet, persistent hope of a father that he chooses the hard road of rebuilding. But I have found my own peace in letting go and understanding that his future is his own to build or to break. My job is no longer to provide him with materials. My job was to show him the flawed blueprint he was working from. And what of my future? It is as quiet and as simple as the landscape outside my window. It is the promise of another morning, another cup of coffee on the porch, another day in the workshop with the satisfying rasp of a hand plane on a piece of cedar. It is not a future of waiting for an end. It is a future of living, of being. I am not the man I was a year ago. That man was a husband, a father, a homeowner. I am still those things in my heart. But now I am also just Caleb, a man who has honored a promise, a man who has found a quiet harbor after a long and terrible storm. The peace I have found here is not just the absence of conflict. It is a positive presence. It is the feeling of the sun on my face on a cold winter morning. It is the solid, reassuring weight of a hammer in my hand. It is the profound stillness that settles over the lake at dusk. In these moments, I feel Lena's presence most strongly. This was her final gift to me. Not the house, not the workshop, but this peace, this unshakable, hard-won peace. I think I have written all that needs to be written. The story feels complete. It is a sad story, but I have come to believe it is also a story of a great and terrible love. The love of a wife for her husband, and the love of a mother for her son, a love so fierce it was willing to burn everything to the ground in order to save him. I will close this journal now. The fire in the wood stove is burning low and the lake is disappearing into the evening mist. The story is told, and I am at last at peace. So that's my story. I've written it all down in this journal just as it happened. The fire in the wood stove is burning low, and outside the first snow of winter has begun to fall, covering the world in a blanket of clean, quiet white. It feels fitting, a new season, a clean slate. Looking back on it all, I see now that this was never just a story about a house or about money. It was a story about blindness. Greed is a kind of blindness. It made my son look at his home and see only its market value. It made him look at his father and see only an obstacle. It made him look at his mother's legacy and see only a number in a bank account. He was so blinded by the life he thought he was owed, he couldn't see the beautiful life he already had. He couldn't see that the real treasure wasn't in the house. It was in the love that had built it. I also learned something about strength. For most of my life, I thought strength was in my hands, in the wood I could shape, in the things I could build. Lena taught me that true strength is quieter than that. It's the strength to be patient when you want to scream. It's the strength to be silent and observe when you want to fight. It's the strength to follow a difficult plan, to play a painful part, all in the service of a greater love. I had to become a weak man in order to find the deepest strength I have ever known. And finally, I learned about legacy. A legacy isn't something you leave behind in a will. It isn't a number passed down from one generation to the next. A true legacy is active. It's the sound of children learning a trade in a workshop. It's the taste of a tomato grown in a community garden. It's the lesson a father gives a son, no matter how painful, in the hope that he might one day become a better man. The inheritance my son was so desperate for left him with nothing but a pile of trash. The legacy my wife built will echo in our community for years to come. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, one piece of advice I could pass on from my 75 years, it's this. I learned that the truest inheritance isn't found in property deeds or bank statements, but in the wisdom to protect your peace. My wife Lena didn't just leave me assets, she left me a blueprint for dignity. She taught me that silence can be a fortress and patience a weapon. True wealth is building a legacy that greed cannot tarnish, and spending your final years in a home built not just with wood and nails, but with foresight, love, and impenetrable peace. Sometimes protecting what you've built means letting go of those who only see its price tag. What about you? Have you ever had to find a quiet strength you didn't know you had, or redefine what legacy means to you? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story.